or other attendees at any time on the app. Just because you're at home doesn't mean you can't network and make those meaningful connections just like you normally would at our events. Right, let's get started. First up today, let's hear from two startups in the music industry who are changing the way we consume, create, and interact with content. Drop Labs and Epidemic Sound are pioneers in both consumer and B2B music. Their CEOs, Oscar Hoglund and Sarah Paley, are here to tell us what's hot, what's not, and what's next.
Hello and welcome to Collision from Home. Susan, I am going to start with you. Can you give me your 60-second elevator pitch, first up, on what it is you're doing at Drop Labs?
Yeah, I mean, what Drop Labs, we are an audio technology that bridges the gap between really live and at-home entertainment, which is extremely relevant now. And what we really do is add a sensory layer to sound, so you don't just listen through your ears, but you hear through your entire body.
Wow. Okay, and Oscar, the same from you for Epidemic Sounds.
So at Epidemic Sound, we're passionate about storytellers, and what we do is we connect storytellers with fantastic music. Ultimately, we want to be part of helping to soundtrack the internet, which is arguably our generation's biggest collective achievement.
Now, first up, while I've got you on screen, Oscar, you have said in the past that record labels hate you at Epidemic Sound. Tell me why that is.
Well, I think that what you're referencing is that at Epidemic, we do things quite differently. We've put ourselves in a position where we want to help storytellers and emerging artists and music creators get in touch with one another. And so we do that by making sure that there are as few middlemen and as few layers as possible between the storytellers and the music creators. In that process, I think a lot of people in the old value chain who have operated in a certain way might feel threatened. I wouldn't argue that they should hate us, but I think that there's a lot of curiosity and a lot of uncertainty about what it is we actually do.
Now, while we're talking about industry disruption, Susan, you were formerly the CEO of Beats by Dre. Now you're on Drop Labs again, trying to kind of change the scene. What's the secret sauce, and what do you think you learned from your time at Beats that can be applied to Drop Labs and can be adopted by other startups?
I mean, everyone, when Beats kind of had their massively successful exit, everyone's like, what's the formula? And to be honest, a lot of times there really is no formula because everything is so different. It was a zeitgeist. It was timing. It was the fact that Vivo had come online. You had a marketing genius in Jimmy, but there were a lot of outside and cultural influences that were all coming together to make Beats as successful as they have been and continue to be. What we're doing at Drop Labs is really, I've decided Beast was great and now I'm going to go really hard. So I'm actually trying to create a new way to really experience sound. And so it's it's category disruption because you're creating a new category and a new way for people to experience sound and really taking the energy of a live event and letting people experience it in their home. And so in doing that, you're creating a new audio platform, a new way to behave around music that's both personalized and also, like I said, feels that energy from something as a large collective. So we're really writing the rules. And so in integrating a whole bunch of different categories together. So we have our work cut out for us, but it's a really compelling product and technology.
You're talking about lots of different movable parts there. And of course, you had your soft launch in November, which was around the time that China started to go into lockdown. And then you've had the lockdown in the US. How has the launch of the business and gaining momentum been impacted by recent events?
So it was kind of a double-edged sword, right? So on the kind of really difficult side was we did a soft launch. We expected to actually bring product back, to start really scaling the business in January, and the entire supply chain went down. And so we got hit with COVID first in China. And we went dark. Our supply chain is really just getting back up and running now, which is, 5 months later. What that did, sort of the other side of that coin, is that it allowed us to really focus on the software and the experience, get a whole bunch of data from our early users, and really serve as the initial launch as a giant beta test. So it gave us that opportunity to see, do people like the product? Does it work as advertised? Are there any major mechanical or software issues that need to be addressed? And so luckily for us, we ended up launching a Gen 1 in a really good place, but it has given us a lot of learning. So when we do get actual full inventory again in July, you'll see a much improved product on multiple fronts.
Now, Oscar, you've been established for a bit longer, but you have raised, I gather, around 60 million in funding to date, and you're being kind of heralded as the incoming unicorn of European music. What do you think about that, and how do you plan to live up to that sort of billing?
Well, I think that much to Susan's previous point, that the time that we find ourselves in now in COVID-19, it's very much a tale of two cities, and it's something that does make me humble and makes me think about the here and the now. So I think I see two different scenarios for us playing out, where I see, on the one hand, sort of us being passionate about storytellers. They come in all different shapes and sizes. So we soundtrack the physical spaces. So we soundtrack airlines, restaurants, hotels, and needless to say, they've had an awful sort of last period of time, and continue to do so. So looking to see how we can help and be a part of that ecosystem community. That's one part of the reality we're seeing. The other part is that we're trying to soundtrack the internet. So we work with the likes of Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and we see the digital moves are, if anything, accelerating. So there's more traction, there's more interest. I think it's safe to say that never in humanity has there been more demand for stories. They can be information, they can be solace, they can be entertainment, and anything between. And we see that part of the world is exploding and sort of growing faster than ever before. So bringing it back, I see a world where you have reason to be incredibly humble. We don't think about ourselves in terms of unicorns, of hailing and being the solution to everything. I think now is a time where you sort of see how can you pay it forward, how can you be part of an ecosystem that can sort of ultimately sort of thrive in these very difficult times. So I'd say that sort of it's much more about collaboration and sort of seeing your part in the grander scheme of things, and trying to be this sort of me individual sort of that runs away in a tangent.
While you're both talking about the sort of the impact of disruption, we clearly in 2020 so far have seen more than our fair share, and not just with COVID. We're witnessing now potentially the largest civil rights movement in human history, and clearly the music industry has a huge history of collaborating in terms of politics, in terms of protest. How do you think that the times we're living in are going to change the music industry, and what do you think is coming next? I'll throw that one to you first, Oscar, since you're on screen.
Well, I like to think that we're in a period of prolific change. I look to storytelling in general, and I think that people are going to look back to where we are now as a renaissance, in the sense that there are so many new formats like online watching, tweets, TikTok, snaps. So never in the history of content creation has there been as much innovation as right now. And leading from that and trying to find a silver lining, I would like to see that now gets remembered for a time where there really was a lot of fundamental change in how the industry worked. I think, speaking as a white middle-aged man who has a lot of white privilege, I think sort of reading how you become an ally, how you're being forced for change, making sure that you side on the side of solutions, of coming up with where we need to go. To Susan's previous points of not looking back, but looking forward. I think those are all sort of ingredients and elements that we need to find. But ultimately, sort of making sure that we're moving in a direction where we want and where we all need to go collectively, both as individuals, but as an industry, and honestly, as a planet as well.
And the same to you, Susan, speaking from the US, what changes do you think we've got coming down the line as a result of these current times in the music industry?
Well, again, I think this change is so fundamental to, I think the US, there were a lot of issues that like in a lot of internal, rage. The US was really at sort of a critical point, and I think this is the critical moment right now for us. And what we're seeing now is really giving people hope that real change can be affected. So it is so much larger than the music industry. And to Oscar's point earlier, like, there's a soundtrack for everything. All of these videos coming out that are empowering all are set to music, right? Because people, this is a very emotional time for people, not just for hope, but also there's a lot of mental health. There's been tremendous fear, anxiety, and depression that have come in through, we've been locked up for a long time. There's a pandemic going on. There's civil unrest. So people are looking for anything that will help them get through this time. And like I said, there's tremendous hope and there's tremendous energy. That's the nice thing, what these riots have done, and what all of these marches and the unrest has shown, that like people are no longer willing to abide by the old ways of doing things and thinking. So the music industry and anything around culture, art, music, storytelling, video, movies, those are all the vanguard. They will start to show and give voice to the stories that that are emerging from what's happening. So it's really exciting. I watch my son, who's 9 years old, who's already setting, like, he's obsessed with Fortnite, but he sets all of his Fortnite stuff to music, right? Because he wants to share that experience. So you've got a generation that is growing up putting music to everything, and that's how they express themselves. Before they're even articulate in words, they're articulate in images and music.
And one aspect of the music industry, which clearly is huge, that we haven't really touched on is live events, which obviously have been severely disrupted. Given that both of you work in areas of the music industry that are disruptive in themselves, what do you think is going to change in terms of the way that we consume music during this time that live events are off the table, and moving out of that time? Susan, to you first.
There was some, I think so, where people thought that podcasts were going to shoot up, but actually music during COVID has actually, people have looked more to music. And if you think about what's happening in Los Angeles, it's not just music anymore, it's sound, right? So like, I wouldn't say it's music in the traditional way. Sound baths, soundscapes, sounds of rain, right? So like, people are really looking to sound in whatever format that takes to really connect with themselves, connect to the world around them. So I think for music, there's going to be a huge renaissance, because people are going to use this to connect. In terms of live events, I think what's going to happen, which is sort of great, is that, at least the way they're doing in the US, they're going to start to, you won't have large stadium concerts anymore, but you'll start to have more and more intimate shows that'll start online like they are now, like people doing IG lives that'll move into smaller venues. So again, allowing a richer, deeper, more emotional connection. And people will, so you won't have 50,000 people in a stadium, but you might have 100 people in a bar or at a small venue, which is sort of great, especially for emerging artists.
And Oscar, I'll throw the same question to you to finish. What do you think we can see coming out of this time of change?
So I think that the power of music is undisputable, right? And I think that, I don't know if there was a word pun intended, but so looking at this talk, we said this is about music that moves you. And I think that's true for both Drop Labs and for Epidemic, in the sense that there are two parts to it. So there's the actual motion of moving us around, so experiencing music. But ultimately, music is about emotions, about feeling. It's about moving the inside, how we feel. And so the role that we can play now in terms of bringing people together, or igniting change, or outcry, or soothing, helping to heal, helping to question, I think it's undeniable that music has a huge role to play. And the intersection between music and technology, where that truly gets global, and where the digital and the physical meets, as it does in this call here, I think that's wildly exciting and reason to be hopeful, sort of in these difficult times of what's around the corner and what the power of music can bring.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing, is that to point out what Oscar said, is that our technology, and any technology for music or for audio, is about bringing that experience closer to people. so they can connect more intimately with it, right? Because again, no matter what you're doing with audio tech, the content is everything. So what people are always looking for is that visceral emotional reaction of feeling like they're as close as they can be to the music or the artist that they love that's making that music. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And really anyone who's looking at like audio technology is enabling the music to connect more to the people.
Connection's a great place to end this on. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Around 5 billion videos are watched on YouTube every day. In the past, YouTube has faced criticism for failing to combat extremism and fake news on its platform. And in a world of disinformation, how are they going to monitor that content to keep people better informed? Here to tell us how to manage this gargantuan task is YouTube's Chief Product Officer, Neil Mohan.
Hi, I'm Dylan Byers, NBC News and MSNBC, and I'm here with Neil Mohan, the Chief Product Officer at YouTube. Neil, thank you for taking the time to do this. We're talking today about information and disinformation, and obviously YouTube's role in trying to be the best provider of information, of accurate information, and the efforts to curb fake news and misinformation and all of that. I want to start though, since we're sort of talking fundamentally about, you know, the difference between what it's okay to post on YouTube and what it's not okay to post on YouTube. I want to start with obviously the hot button issue in Silicon Valley among the social media companies, which is the sort of different approaches that Facebook and Twitter took to tweets from the President of the United States, in which he appeared to call for violence against protesters. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey have taken very different approaches to that. Mark Zuckerberg's obviously has been pretty laissez-faire. We're not going to interfere with that speech unless it presents an imminent threat. Jack Dorsey put warning labels on the tweets that effectively said these tweets promote violence, but kept it up because he is, after all, the President of the United States, and a threat of violence like that is relevant and newsworthy. I wonder if the President of the United States were to make a YouTube video and post a YouTube video in which he suggests that looters might be shot. What is the process by which YouTube would deal with that, and what ultimately would be YouTube's policy and YouTube's decision on that?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me, Dylan. It's a good question. I think that it's, it's hard, obviously in a hypothetical scenario, it's hard to comment on the specifics, but what I can tell you is just sort of our general approach to that process. And I think what I would just highlight about YouTube is, first and foremost, we have, it's an open platform, but we've had community guidelines, as you know. It's been 15 years since the founding of YouTube, and we've had community guidelines that are aimed at protecting our users and our creators and our entire ecosystem since the very early days. And one of those guidelines is against promoting or glorifying violence in the real world out there, no matter where it's happening in the world. And that's a policy that's been in place. We're transparent about it. We publish that on our website. And the key thing about our community guidelines and our content policies is they apply to everyone. They're based on the content that's within the video, as opposed to, say, who the speaker is. And we try to apply those universally, whether it's around, in this case, related to real world violence, whether it's our hate speech policies, harassment, et cetera, et cetera. And so the decisions we would make would be based on what's within the four corners of the video in this case. Of course, in the context of video, there's a lot more sort of context that's in terms of what's happening in the video, in addition to just what the speaker is saying. So those things would go into consideration as well. And then we have a set of what I would call principles by which we would evaluate that video. And one of them includes provisions for keeping content up as long as it comes with context, so educational, documentary, sort of scientific, artistic exceptions to the video. So for example, if that particular incident is being covered by an authoritative news organization that's providing context around it, or another means by which a broader sort of story is being told about it by either a documentary sort of purposes or news organization purposes, that video could remain up in that context as well. So that's a little bit of sort of the general principles, which is we have community guidelines against glorifying violence. We apply those universally, regardless of who the speaker is. And then we have this exception framework that allows for content to stay up as long as it's being reported on or covered within a broad context by an authoritative news organization.
So, and I know you say YouTube doesn't pay attention so much to the speaker as to the content of the speech or the video itself. Obviously, not everyone who posts videos that would seem to toe the line of, say, the promotion of violence is the President of the United States. A lot of that stuff is flying more so under the radar. What is the sort of philosophical North Star for you guys in terms of how you govern the decision between contextualizing certain videos with fact checking, with disclaimers, warning labels, and the consideration not to have too heavy a hand in terms of how you try to influence the speech, given that you are a global company with so many users who have so many different values?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head at the end of your question there. Ever since the founding of YouTube, it's been a place where people from all over the world can share their opinions, their thoughts, their creativity, a wide, diverse, view of opinions and worldviews, etc. All of those exist on our platform, as you know. At the same time, it's not an anything goes environment. Like I said, we've had the community guidelines since a very early days, everything from adult content to making sure kids are protected, and in this case, as we talked about, glorification of violence. Our principles are really striking that balance between an open platform with those diversity of voices and a set of community guidelines that we're clear about, that we're transparent about, that are designed to govern the type of content that is eligible to remain on the platform versus content that we would remove for violation of those community guidelines. And so that's kind of the North Star that we strive towards. Having said that, a lot of the conversation tends to focus on the content that stays up or comes down on the platform. And I can understand that those tend to be, more very tangible type decisions that you can see on the platform. But our approach is a much more holistic one because content that comes down or stays up represents a really, really small fraction of all the videos that are on the platform, all the consumption that's happening by the couple billion users that come to the platform globally. And so there are some other principles that are really important as well, which is when it comes to, especially when users are looking for information on our platform, and in the case of the pandemic, news-related content consumption on our platform, including channels like yours, grew 75% year on year. So people were really thirsty for that information around medical information, politics, etc., related to COVID and the pandemic. In those situations, we tend to focus on making sure that the information that users are getting comes from authoritative sources. And that notion of authority is not defined by YouTube. It's driven by third-party evaluators all over the world that represent sort of the populations that they come from. So it's channels that have established a history of authoritativeness, credibility around that particular topic. And so you may have noticed in your own experience when you search for something like coronavirus, say, or even when you open up the app, we had that COVID-19 news shelf that ran, and it featured content from authoritative sources, oftentimes from a country's national health authority, for example, the CDC here in the US, and we worked with 85 health authorities across all over the world to make sure that authoritative content was being shown to our users, especially in the case of a pandemic where science was literally being created on an hour-by-hour basis, and the information underlying all of this was changing. And so that's kind of one core principle. The other one that I think is equally important is that even though videos might not be policy violative, they could be potentially borderline in nature or still potentially spreading, harmful misinformation. And in those cases, we strive to ensure that the views around those are reduced so that users are getting high quality information when they're looking for it or when they're consuming that type of content. And then the final piece, and then is you may have noticed that we also run information panels, especially around content that might be prone to misinformation. You might have seen the COVID-related information panel that ran below videos around coronavirus. It ran in the home feed, and it also we were running a medical panel that runs in search results around it. And those panels across the world, since we instituted them, have gotten 100 billion impressions. And so, again, raising up sort of authoritative content and making sure that users have full context by serving up these info panels that link out to, say, the CDC or other kind of credible medical authorities.
The issues of you talk about borderline content and misinformation, and you say it's not a huge, it's a relatively small part of the overall content that gets uploaded to YouTube any given day. What is the statistic on how many videos or how many minutes of video are uploaded any given minute or hour?
Yeah, it's obviously it varies, but globally about 500 hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every single minute of every single day. So there's an enormous amount of content.
Right. So that already seems like a sort of overwhelming challenge in terms of monitoring all that. And then you add on top of it the issue that issues can be borderline, that things can get murky. It seems to me, with thinking about COVID-19 and how you have the strategy for dealing with that information, that there are clearer lines, and that oftentimes, though probably not always, there's less gray matter, and there's sort of more black and white between what's real, what's true, and what's not. Are there lessons for you guys going through this and thinking about how you get COVID-related information out to people that you think you could apply to sort of in terms of how you think about your policy on all issues of misinformation going forward?
Yeah, I would say a few things there. First, everything that we've done as it relates to the pandemic in terms of making sure that our users are getting high quality information, credible information when they're looking for it on YouTube, is not something that we kicked off, at the beginning of this pandemic, back in January, February. It's based on the foundation of work, as you know, that we've been working on really for the last sort of 2-3 years, as we've thought about how our community guidelines need to be adjusted to the global platform that YouTube has begun. And so you've seen updates, as I said, to our hate policies, our harassment policies, our misinformation approach to misinformation. And so even those principles that I outlined in terms of what comes up and stays down, but also how that works with how we treat content that remains on the platform in terms of raising up authoritative voices, that was a framework that was in place before this pandemic hit. And so that has been helpful in terms of us trying to be as nimble as possible to addressing it. And in one sense, your point around misinformation related to this is true in terms of there's been clear guidelines, for example, around things like social distancing, shelter in place. We've tried to make sure that those guidelines are clear and front and center for our users. But also, in a lot of ways, the pandemic has showed us how quickly misinformation can be created around this, right? For example, even a few days before coronavirus was associated with 5G, who would have guessed that that would be a conspiracy theory? And so my learning from that is it's important to have a framework of a policy, and we've had that around our medical disinformation policy, but it's also really important to remain nimble and flexible in terms of adjusting enforcement guidelines and updating examples that we give to all of our raters all over the world and ensure that our machine learning classifiers stay up to date on as well. And so we've had to be nimble, adjust, our guidelines as new types of misinformation kept coming up. And as a result, since the beginning of the pandemic, we've removed from our platform thousands of videos. I think my key learning is that it's one aspect is really just about what stays up and gets removed. The other aspect is what I talked about before, which is giving users appropriate context with things like the info panel in search, right below videos on the watch page, and raising up authoritative voices, especially when the information is changing. Guidelines, for example, for medical authorities changed as they discovered more about this pandemic and how it spread as well.
Do you find when you provide that context around videos, do you find that context gets the same traffic, views, clicks, attention that the original piece of content does?
So the way that, so one aspect of how our system works is that panel that runs below the video will always be present when that video is being consumed. So that's one nice characteristic of it when a user is on YouTube. As I mentioned, it's gotten those panels collectively across all of our surfaces on YouTube, whether it's the home feed, the watch page, or in search, has gotten on the order of 100 billion impressions. The click-through and the engagement on them has been quite high. And I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that users are looking for that type of information to protect themselves, to protect their families, their loved ones, etc. And so that's been my experience. I think that in terms of learnings that come out of this pandemic, that is something, we were already employing that before around other conspiracy prone types of content, for example, flat Earth and did man land on the moon. And I think that's a concept that we would want to continue to use and expand on, even as the world starts to emerge from this crisis.
You mentioned earlier, you were talking about guidelines. Obviously, there's I think a very important debate happening right now, and it's been happening for years between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. over who sets what guidelines. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook has called for greater regulation. There's a sense that your lives in terms of content moderation might be easier if you had more clearly defined rules of the road. What is your position on that in terms of how much would you like to see Washington step in and sort of more clearly define what can and can appear on YouTube?
The way I thought about it is, a lot of the magic of YouTube and the reason why, users all over the world engage with it is connection with the creators, the people that are producing that amazing content on YouTube, whether it's, for example, the Andrea Bocelli concert on Easter from the Duomo in Milan that was watched millions and millions and millions of times. And I think the power of YouTube is that connectivity and that community that it creates all over the world, probably thousands and thousands of times a day for individual users all over the world. And a lot of the magic of that comes from the fact that of our mission of really kind of giving everybody a voice and showing everybody the world. And that comes from the open nature of our platform and how that open platform works in conjunction with the clear community guidelines that we've always set. So, a big part of, my responsibility, my team's responsibility is actually to work with our partners in government, regulators, et cetera, so we can explain in detail how the platform works for, citizens all over the world. I would say that those conversations, when we have them, are really constructive. And, our approach is the more there's understanding on both sides, the more that we can come up with a solution that works for societies all over the world. But I do say that when we have those conversations, there's a real appreciation for the value that YouTube delivers, not just in terms of information, which is what we've talked a lot about here, but also in terms of connectivity and community. What I found really interesting about the last couple of months is as people sheltered in place, YouTube was one of those places where people did come together and create those, virtual water cooler moments, whether it was the Bocelli concert or musicians in Brazil raising money for hospitals in that country. And I can go on and on in terms of the amazing stuff that our creators did.
Well, that leads us into another question I wanted to ask, which is not so much about misinformation, but the way that people use your platform. There is, more people are creating more content than ever before, especially now that people are stuck at home. They're coming up with new and creative ways to do it. When I interviewed Susan Wojcicki, the CEO, a few months back for my podcast, one of the things we talked about was TikTok and the rise of new services, and whether or not that is going to force you guys to rethink, how you create new features or new tools, and maybe look at things like what they're doing with shorter form content. How has the rise of TikTok influenced how you think about the way that people might want to use YouTube and the sort of changes you can make? Or do you firmly sort of believe that YouTube does what it does and TikTok does what it does, and never the twain shall meet?
The way that I think about it, and Susan and I have talked a lot about this, is our focus remains on how do we make sure that we build the right set of tools and products for our creators to be able to do two things. One is to build the audience around their creativity, around their ideas. And then since the very early days, also give them a way to build a living, to generate revenue, to make money off of that amazing creativity. And on the user side, finding ways for users to be able to connect with all of those creators that they love. That is really our goal. That's our mission. That's what we focus on. Our entire product roadmap is oriented around that. And the form that takes, whether it's a video on demand video, a live stream, we've invested in other new formats that you may have seen, like stories, which are shorter form ways for creators and users to connect. All of those are means to an end around that. And so those two pieces of connecting our users and then giving our creators a way to actually build a sustained living off of that is really what remains our focus.
Unfortunately, I'm getting the buzzer and we're out of time. So the future of YouTube will have to wait for another day. But Neil, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you so much.
What if everyone here in this room could donate 90 minutes per week to change the world?
Across the Western world, there's massive discontent and anger.
We have legalized the abuse of the person.
We need equality, and I don't want to feel like I have to wait for that. I want it right now.
There are many challenges and opportunities facing us at this moment.
If we get it wrong, every generation that follows us will pay a price.
The future is not a solo act. It will take all of us working together.
Follow up with precision after sending a presentation. Sizzle notifies you when your document was opened, shows you how it was interacted with, and allows viewers to leave feedback and book a follow-up from inside your proposal.
Hi, I'm Greg Peters.
I'm Brad. I'm Laura Hale.
Hi, I'm Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Zach Ray.
Hi,
I'm Chad House.
I'm David Schneider.
I'm Kate Brand. Kate Rosenbluth.
I'm Josh Sadowski, and welcome to Collision. I'm David.
I'm Katie Davis.
My name is Hannah
Schill.
Welcome to Collision from Home.
Our generation are going through a period where access to information is very, very easy.
Data has replaced oil as the new key to success.
It's really a double-edged sword.
It's a data game. We're going to start to see consumers wanting to take back a lot more control. And I think that's going to provide a lot of opportunities for innovation and a lot of challenges.
The rise of Asia technology is one of the great stories of the current age.
Conferences like this only make it more of a magnet for the tech startup scene.
That conversation that happens because of this event, I think is going to be increasingly important for the world.
Coming to Rise is about being inspired, about being challenged.
This opportunity to learn
Brings together so many different types of people.
We are going to get better as humanity only when we work together.
It's impossible to pick one word to describe our next speaker. She's a musician, a reality TV star, an investor, a socialite, a model, an actress, and an heiress. The list goes on. Let's hear what Paris Hilton is up to next.
How's the volume and stuff now?
The volume's good. All right. This is Paris fucking Hilton!
I love you, Scarlett! Thank you!
Everyone thinks they know me. No one has ever known the real me.
Paris, it's great to be here with you. The audience has just gotten a sneak peek of your documentary. So tell us a little bit about, why now for this project?
I just felt it was the perfect time to do a film like this. I've been through so much in life, and I finally discovered who I truly am. And I feel that the public, they got to know me through The Simple Life, where I was playing a character and everyone assumed that's who I really was in real life, when it's quite the opposite. So I just really wanted to show that and what I've been through and have people see the real side to me and who I truly am, and really get an inside look, because I think that the public has mostly seen me, on that show and on red carpets and kind of the glamour and all of that, but there's a lot more to me than that. And I have a story that I want to tell, and something that I know is going to be inspiration to others. And just excited for the world to see who I really am.
So, we all know the old phrase, famous for being famous, but obviously there's a lot more to it than that. And it's, what do you do with it, right? And you've been doing quite a lot. Take us through the Paris Hilton empire, because, as you suggested, it's more than just that show. I mean, there's, any number of dozens of different product lines and, various ways that you're expanding that empire. Let's hear about it.
Well, I knew with that show that I could use that platform to build my own brand. And the first product I launched was my fragrance. And now I actually am about to launch my 27th perfume. So I've been in the fragrance industry for over 17 years now. And also I have 19 other product lines. I have my own skincare line, makeup, jewelry, sunglasses, lingerie, shoes, clothing, handbags, children's clothes, dog clothes, homeware, basically any product you can think of, I make. I'm also involved in the tech space now, so I have my own tech projects that I'm working on, different apps, and investing into different companies. So I'm doing a lot of that as well in venture capital. and also following in my family's footsteps with my own real estate properties. I have 2 in the Philippines right now, and we're going to be opening up more as well. And music, DJing, modeling. I like to do everything. I'm an Aquarius, so I'm always like to be creative and make the most out of life. And it's amazing that I get to do all these things that I love for a living.
So yeah, and let's dig into the venture capital stuff and the DJ career. I've got a bunch of questions on that, but yeah, I think for the audience, you know, always these moments, the most important thing is the storytelling, right? Like, what is if there's one story, one moment when, you know, when you were younger, where the light bulb went on in your head and you were like, I have this this moment, and I have a chance to turn this from a, you know, like a 15 minutes scenario to a career. You know, tell us about that. Do you remember, you know, if there was an instance like that, how old you were, where you were? Bring us into the moment.
Well, when I was a little girl and I lived in Los Angeles, I was a huge tomboy and loved animals. And I just wanted to be a veterinarian just because I was a huge animal lover. And obviously I still am. And then I moved to New York, and then I started modeling and doing runway shows and just seeing a whole different side to life, because my family was very strict. So when I lived in LA, I had a very sheltered life. I wasn't really allowed to go anywhere or go on a date or do anything like that. And then moving to New York, it was just this whole new world that opened up. And when my sister and I moved there, all of a sudden, you know, we were getting calls from all these huge brands and different places wanting us to go to the opening of, you know, Christian Dior or Louis Vuitton, just all of these huge brands wanting us to be associated with them. And then my sister and I became the it girls of New York and the Hilton sisters, and basically started a brand from there. And then we got offered, when we were teenagers, around, I was like 16, and they offered for my sister and I to fly to Tokyo to start our first handbag line brand. And from there, we were on billboards everywhere and magazine covers, and basically built our brand together. And from that point, I knew that I could build something from there. And that was my dream. So I was like, you know, I love animals, but, you know, I could just have a lot of pets. I don't need to be a veterinarian. I want to be a businesswoman and a brand. And ever since then, it's just amazing how it just took off, especially when The Simple Life aired. That's when I took it to the next level.
What's it like to have that level of success, that level of fame at the age of 16? I mean, you know, both in terms of sort of psychologically, but also, you know, financially, were you in a place where, you know, things were set aside for you until you turned 18, or were you very much in control of your own finances from the point at which things started to take off?
Well, being 16 and having all this happen so fast was just very overwhelming, but also really exciting. It was just this whole new world for me. And moving to New York, I felt like I was an adult. I just felt like it just changed my entire life. And I opened up my own bank account and started making my own money and just putting it in there. And I was in control of whatever I wanted. Even my family, of course, you know, they were strict with me as well, but they were also proud of me that I was being an independent woman already. So I was in control of my life and my finances.
So, you know, we've talked about the idea of monetizing fame. And to me, there are, you know, two main ways to do that. And one is in terms of earnings and one is in terms of wealth. And so, you know, on the earnings front, you mentioned your fragrances, handbags, and so forth. But, you know, in recent years, I know one of the things you've been getting into more is the DJing side of things. You know, take me back to the beginning of that. What was the spark for becoming a DJ?
Well, when I was 20, I got a call from the Maloof family, and they were opening up the Palms Hotel in Las Vegas, and said that they wanted to pay me to come for the opening and cut the ribbon and basically host the whole hotel opening. So I wasn't 21 at the time, but I lied and said I was. And basically I took my ID and changed, typed a different number and made it look like I was 21. So I was able to go to Las Vegas, and it was this huge opening. And from there, right after that, all of a sudden, my team started getting calls from every single nightclub in Las Vegas offering for me to host different parties there, New Year's Eve, Halloween, just basically every day we were getting calls. So from there, I realized I could make that into a lucrative business, which was basically inventing getting paid to party. So I was doing that all the time and for many years, and it became a huge business and started doing it all around the world. And then around 10 years ago, I just started noticing a shift in the appearance world where I saw that it was more about the DJ. It wasn't about a celebrity. It was more like the DJ was the whole draw. So I found the best people in the business and hired DJ trainers, and basically every single day for 6 hours a day, I would learn everything there was to learn about that. And I had my first concert, which was in Brazil for 30,000 people, closing for Jennifer Lopez. I'd never DJ'd in my life. I was so nervous. But as soon as I got up there and just felt the energy and the people screaming, and I just felt like a rock star. It was just like this indescribable feeling. So ever since then, I have now been touring around the world, DJ residencies in Ibiza and everywhere. And I won the award for Best Female DJ. So it's exciting just to have turned that into a huge business.
So, a lot of folks say, DJing, especially pop DJ, you go up there, you press a button, and you dance. How would you describe your experience when you're up there, behind the monitors and so forth?
Well, I think, there's definitely some people who do that, but I'm not one of those people. I know that especially someone like me, people are going to really judge. So I have to work even harder at that. So every set I've played is completely different. I'm always feeling the crowd and just, I don't know, I never really have anything planned. I just go with the flow. And it's actually very technical. Like with DJing, there's so much that goes into it. Even if you look at the system, I'm working on a Tractor S8 with CDJs, and there's just so much that you can do with it, where you can even be remixing live. There's just a lot that goes into it, which I love because I've always been a huge undercover nerd. I'm like a huge tech geek, so I just love anything to do with technology. So yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it than most people would think.
Obviously, the live music industry has been under tremendous strain, virtually non-existent at the moment. But we're starting to hear about things opening up, whether it's drive-through concerts or different people going back to different parts of the world where things have opened up a little bit more. What are your plans? When do you see yourself getting back on the road? And how do you kind of mix that with live streaming and so forth?
Well, this has been a huge change because I'm used to playing a couple times a week and being around the world doing this. So it's a lot different, but I've been doing a lot of live streams. We did a lot of charity events. I just did one for Animal Haven, and we raised almost $500,000 for that event. And then I did one for Triller, and we did another one for Boohoo. And I have the Minecraft is doing a music festival called Electric Balakaloo, which is June 23rd, where everyone's going to be made into a VR avatar. So I'm excited to do that. So it's mostly just been a lot of live streams, and it's completely different, just being at home alone and, having to have that same energy because you're on camera, but you don't have the energy of all the fans and all the people jumping and screaming. And I miss that part definitely. Like I can't wait till the world comes back and I'm able to really go on tour again. But thank God with technology and everything that we have, we're able to do it like that. But it's definitely not the same, for sure.
So over the past decade, a ton of entertainers have been getting into the venture capital world, from Ashton Kutcher, probably the best known example, to Shaquille O'Neal and Serena Williams, the list goes on. When a lot of these folks come in, they'll put their own money in, but they also get free equity or advisory shares or whatever you want to call it. What is it like for you? What's the setup when you invest in, and what are some of the companies that you've been putting your cash into?
When I'm doing my investments, yes, I will invest my own money, as well as my team will make it so that I get equity and more points just because of what my name brings to the table. And some new companies that I just invested in that I'm really excited about. One is called Daily Harvest, which has done incredibly well, especially during this time with everyone being at home and cooking for themselves and wanting to be healthy. And it's something that I love, and I actually was using this product way before I started investing in them. And as well as a new one called Good Catch, which is plant-based seafood, which I think is important just for the oceans, and especially now with all the pollution in the ocean, there's no idea what these fish are eating. So it's exciting to be involved in a project that not only helps the environment, but is also healthy for you.
So we've been talking about equity in this conversation, and obviously that's a term that has a lot of meaning, outside of just venture capital, and especially in recent times, it's been really meaningful in the world abroad, and raised a lot of questions as to who gets what opportunities. So you're certainly one of very few women in the EDM space and in the venture capital space. But how do we start to extend, those opportunities, not just to people who come from backgrounds of privilege, but to people from underrepresented communities? How do we get them, into the EDM world, into the venture capital world, and starting to build some of the, generational wealth that has been lacking, particularly in communities of color, for so long?
Well, I think it's important for different companies to make it more accessible for everyone to be involved into these type of business deals, because it is possible. And I feel that not only if someone has a name, I feel that if they have an idea, that it's important to listen to everyone. So I think that that's something that I've really seen a huge shift in, especially within the past year. And I think it's an exciting time for everyone to really, just work to have their dreams come true. And I feel that that is a new space that we're going into right now, where people are going to get involved into these deals and projects like they never have before, because it's a conversation that people are bringing up with everyone. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think even though 2020 has been a very crazy time, I also think that it's really a shift in energy, and it's Mother Nature really telling us that we need to change in so many aspects. So I think that's something that I'm going to definitely champion for, and talk to my teams and people about really focusing on that as well.
Yeah. Well, we're all out of time, but I think that's a great place to leave it. Paris, thanks so much for your time. And audience, thanks so much for listening. See you next time.
Thank you.
What if everyone here in this room could donate 90 minutes per week to change the world?
Across the Western world, there's massive discontent and anger.
We have legalized the abuse of the person.
We need equality, and I don't want to feel like I have to wait for that. I want it right now.
There are many challenges and opportunities facing us at this moment.
If we get it wrong, every generation that follows us will pay a price.
The future is not a solo act. It will take all of us working together.
Our generation are going through a period where access to information is very, very easy.
Data has replaced oil as the new king to success.
It's really a double-edged sword. We're going to start to see consumers wanting to take back a lot more control. And I think that's going to provide a lot of opportunities for innovation and a lot of challenges.
The rise of Asia technology is one of the great stories of the current age.
Conferences like this only make it more of a magnet for the tech startup scene.
That conversation that happens because of this event, I think is going to be increasingly important for the world.
Coming to Rise is about being inspired, about being challenged.
This opportunity to learn
Brings together so many different types of people.
We are going to get better as humanity only when we work together.
Greatness is hard to come by, but that's the only way I can think to describe this next hour. We've got Microsoft President Brad Smith, DJ Steve Aoki, Headspace CEO Rich Pearson, but before we even get to them, there's not much Gen Z and Generation Alpha can't find a tutorial for online, except for empathy. That's an entirely human intelligence. So how can educators teach empathy to digital natives? Let's hear from the author of Roots of Empathy, Mary Gordon, and the founder of Tech Girls, Tracy Wilson Rossman.
Now, as we know, Collision is a tech conference, so people might be wondering where a discussion on empathy fits into all this. So to frame this conversation, I think it's important that we start with a baseline definition of empathy. So Mary, I'd like to start with you. Give us your perspective.
Well, I think number one, empathy is the ultimate human trait, and there are two major aspects to empathy. Cognitive empathy, perspective taking, is probably the most commonly accepted definition of empathy, but it's the soulless part of it. It's the part that allows you to be a super psychopath. So the other part of empathy that makes us human is the affective side of empathy, which is emotion. And emotional literacy is key to being fully empathic. So that, I think, would be my stopgap overview of what empathy means.
So then, given that definition, Tracy, I want to bring you in here. What are you seeing in terms of empathy and also a lack of empathy in your industry?
So, I mean, I'll take it from the positive side. There's been, in the software development space, a movement towards what's termed human-centered design, which is really talking to the end users of ideas or just the software that you're creating before it gets created, so that there's a better understanding of how that software can work, that brings into the idea of what the end user is looking at before it gets to the software developers. I also am seeing a trend for software developers to be looking at what they are designing and how it's impactful. It's not just technology for technology's sake. So I think that that's something that we should all be aware of. I also think that the movement towards diversity within the software industry will impact how products are designed.
So give us a little more insight into that, because a lot of times some of these things are sort of designed in a bubble, and the end users, when they get there, they're like, this doesn't actually solve the problem. How does having more of that diversity as well as empathy really help not just the products and the services, but bottom lines as well?
Well, I think it's really important. There was a study that was done by Scientific America, I think within 5 years ago, which showcased how products that had more diversity on the teams that were creating them had better results, better outcomes. So empathy and a broader sense of who's putting together end solutions has shown that it works at the bottom line. So it is not just about being socially aware, it's also about how, when you really think about who's going to be using the product, that it does create better products that people want to use, because we've all looked at products, all of us, and have said, what were they thinking when this was developed? I also think that it's important for the software industry, the technology industry, to think about, it's not just about using cool technology. It's what problem are you solving? So let's not fit the technology into, making it all about that and making it cool versus really thinking about the solution that you're trying and the problem you're trying to solve.
So then, Mary, given the importance of this from concept to the final products and services, we're really still not seeing a lot of empathy sort of built into a lot of these processes, these systems. How do you teach empathy? Is that something that can actually be taught?
Well, I always say that empathy cannot be taught in the traditional ways, as you would say in an instructional setting like a school or university, but it can be caught. And I believe that we are all predisposed to empathy, and that has now been scientifically proven, but that empathy either flourishes or fades in the first year of life, in the loving relationship between the parent or parents and that baby. And if that baby does not experience being felt and being responded to, that baby is at risk of not developing empathy, that baby is learning to love or learning to hate. And if you trace back sociopaths, they had a terrible first year and early childhood experience. That said, we bring that loving relationship of a parent and a baby and that attachment into a classroom for over a school year. Children observe and interact with a parent and a baby to take the perspective of that baby, the cognitive aspect of empathy. How is that baby feeling? What's the name of that feeling? And how does the parent understand how that baby is feeling and respond? So that basically children are learning the alphabet of their emotions, which is key because that's the affective side of empathy. If you don't have the words to think about, you can't think about anything. So the brilliant thing about teaching or learning empathy, and I mean, just because we teach doesn't mean anyone is learning. Just because you throw a ball doesn't mean anyone is catching. And I think we oversubscribe to instruction as the way to learn. And I mean, most kids and adults actually who are involved with technology are self-learning. So I think there is an amazing opportunity to develop empathy at any stage of life, given these opportunities to have an emotional connection as you do in our classrooms on 3 continents. Doesn't matter what language, it's the human spirit. It's the element of our humanity that is the child is learning. And children do learn to take perspective and do develop emotional literacy and do become empathic. And when that happens, not only are you affecting good business practice, you're affecting good humanity for the generations. And we do know that this capacity to be empathic has a very deep biological base. So yes, empathy can absolutely be learned.
Now, I do want to look at something. I know that, Mary, you've talked about what you've called empathy disparity. And we know that some analysts blame technology for us being less empathetic now, or perhaps more so our use of technology. I'd like to ask you both how the tech world can be part of the solution. Mary, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the tech world is here to stay. It's just we have to appreciate its power, its ability to be a support to our humanity, but also to look at balance. And particularly when you look at how we spend the time in our day, it's particularly in childhood. If children don't have opportunities to be in real face-to-face relationships, they don't learn the nuances of how to be a friend, how to be a colleague, how to collaborate, so that later on, technology will encompass empathy. So I think really we need to be mindful of balances. It's not just work-life balance, it's technology relationship balance. So I don't see technology as the enemy at all. I see it as being a support to our greater humanity. We are in a crisis of connection at the moment. And I think technology can help that as long as we realize we still do need time with one another, because you don't develop emotionally unless you are in the give and take of a relationship.
And Tracy?
would agree with Mary. I think the studies that we're seeing, the short studies that have happened at this point, people crave a human connection. Right now, technology is enabling this human connection. It allows us face-to-face. It does not allow the physical closeness that we're able to do. And, avatars aren't going to replace me being actually with you in the room. There is a difference. But technology has enabled us at this point during this crisis to continue to conduct work, to continue to conduct business, whether it's creating software or ordering food. There is a place for technology, and I believe that post-COVID, we're going to honestly understand the balance between technology and human interaction, physical human interaction.
Well, very well said, and thank you so much, both of you ladies there, for joining me today. Mary Gordon, the founder of Root of Empathy, and Tracy Wilson-Rossman, the founder of Tech Girls and CMO of Chariot Solutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
The rise of Asia technology is one of the great stories of the current age.
Conferences like this only make it more of a magnet for the tech startup scene.
Coming to Rise is about being inspired, about being challenged.
This opportunity to learn.
It brings together so many different types of people.
We are going to get better as humanity only when we work together.
Hi, I'm Greg Peters.
I'm Laura Hale. Hi, I'm Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Zach Ray.
Hi,
I'm Chip House.
I'm David Schneider.
I'm Kate Brand. Kate Rosenblum.
I'm Josh Sadowski, and welcome to Collision. I'm David.
I'm Kate Davidson. My name is Hannah Shield.
Welcome to Collision from Home.
What if everyone here in this room could donate 90 minutes per week to change the world?
Across the Western world, there's massive discontent and anger.
We have legalized the abuse of the person.
We need equality, and I don't want to feel like I have to wait for that. I want it right now.
There are many challenges and opportunities facing us at this moment.
If we get it wrong, every generation that follows us will pay a price.
The future is not a solo act. It will take all of us working together.
The rise of Asia technology is one of the great stories of the current age.
Conferences like this only make it more of a magnet for the tech startup scene.
Coming to Rise is about being inspired, about being challenged.
It's an opportunity to learn.
It brings together so many different types of people.
We are going to get better as humanity only when we work together.
Few people know how to effectively and ethically lead a company like Brad Smith. He's sitting down with Steve Adler from Thomson Reuters to discuss the nature of leadership during a crisis. Over now to Steve and the Chief Legal Officer and President of Microsoft, Brad Smith.
Hi, I'm Steve Adler. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Reuters, and I'm pleased to be hosting a conversation with Brad Smith, President of Microsoft, at Collision from Home. Welcome, Brad. It's good to see you, albeit electronically.
Well, it's always great to see you, Steve. I wish we were in person, but on the other hand, I feel like a guest in your home. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, and welcome to my home. I want to talk about a couple of big themes today. There are a couple of huge things going on in the world. There are many more than that, but we'll probably end up focusing mostly on two. But let me first start with a broad question. So we're a very tech-focused and tech-driven society now, and of course, you're president of an enormous technology company. Do you think tech companies have a special social responsibility to use technology for the public good in a crisis like this? And are shareholders okay with that, or do you have to sort of balance the shareholder versus the public interest at a time like this?
Well, I do believe we have a special responsibility in a crisis, any crisis, and certainly in a crisis like the one that we're confronting today globally with something like COVID-19. The digital technology that we and other companies create are really indispensable tools to help address the crisis. And they can also be turned against us if we don't use them wisely or other people deploy them in effect as a weapon instead of a tool, so to speak. And from our perspective, we've always been clear to ourselves, to our employees, and to our shareholders. Microsoft is a company focused on the long term. If somebody wants to buy a stock on Monday and sell it on Wednesday, there's lots of other places they can look. But if they want to invest in a company that is committed to the long term, to constant innovation, and frankly, to a sense of responsibility, then we do hope that they'll think about us and hopefully share with us the commitment and a bit of the pride that comes from having the opportunity to address the broader needs of the world.
And we'll get into some of those specifics, but I do want to ask you about something you said, because I was fascinated by it. You said we're fortunate that the pandemic occurred, not that we're fortunate, but we're fortunate the pandemic occurred in 2020 instead of even 10 or 20 years earlier because of the advantages of technology. And that's just an interesting thought. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, it's really an interesting thing as I think about it, because as we all know, on average, the kind of pandemic we're dealing with here comes about once a century, and it's been basically 102 years. If it had come 92 or 82 years after 1918, just think how different the last few months would have been for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to work from home. And obviously not everybody is that fortunate. Frankly, we probably would be spending hours every day just listening to each other's voices on conference calls. We probably wouldn't have had the kind of broadband connectivity that's necessary to have the kinds of video conversations that you and I are having right now. And even when you think about the state of video technology 10 to 20 years ago, it didn't have the performance, it didn't have the number of pixels. It wasn't that long ago that a video on a computer screen was closer to the size of a postage stamp than the full screen that we get to benefit from today.
Yeah. I'll come back to the pandemic, but I want to just hit, of course, the other big issue. As we all know, the country has been really roiled by protests of the killing of George Floyd, police brutality more generally, and I'd say racial injustice even more broadly. just ask you a very general question and then get into some of the specifics. What is Microsoft doing in response?
Well, I think first we're starting with a clear recognition that this is the first year of the 5th century of racism in America, really institutionalized racism in our country. And so, we naturally have been focused on it. I think everybody is and should be. I think the first conclusion that we've come to is there are certain things that we can do to help contribute to a better world. But the one thing we absolutely can do, and the place we must start, is with our own four walls, with our company itself. And while we've made certain strides, I think this is a powerful reminder that we need to do more, we need to move faster, we need to do better when it comes to recruiting people from the African American and Black community, creating opportunities for them to succeed, having them represented at all levels, including the most senior levels of the company. We are a company that has a chairman of the board who's African American, but among our senior leadership team and management, we don't have that representation. And then there are all the other critical things that we need to do as well with the companies that we do business with, where we can help advance more opportunities for African American and Black employees of those firms. And I think most broadly for society, we can harness technology as another indispensable tool, not to solve this problem by itself, but to be the tool it can be, to shine a light on data, to create transparency that will foster accountability. Data and digital technology can do more. We've been focused actually for a number of years on this, but here too, we will need to redouble, expand, and strengthen our efforts.
Yeah, and of course, Microsoft, along with other tech companies and other parts of society, is under particular pressure right now on various things. As you know, a group of employees has called on Microsoft to end its contracts with police departments. And I'd like to ask, because I couldn't find it, frankly, when people wrote about it, what kind of contracts does Microsoft have with police departments? And what's your position on continuing those contracts?
Well, for the most part, we provide the same kind of technology to police departments that we provide to everybody else, including Reuters. People use our tools and our cloud services to write, to do research, to create presentations, to do calculations, and these days, a whole lot more. The thing that we really try to focus on are the issues that are most important and the technologies that are most sensitive. When we think about the issues around racial justice, for example, it's critically important that we not be creating technology or licensing it in scenarios that could lead to bias, that could advance the kinds of surveillance that would undermine the human rights, the civil liberties of people, that we not be supporting the kinds of tactics that have caused concern. Now, at the same time, there are many other uses of our technology that you would probably say are either benign or maybe even societally beneficial. One thing I think it's fair to say is you can't have accountability for police departments if you don't have data. We need to know more as a society for the 18,000 police departments in the United States about how many complaints are filed by citizens, about what kinds of complaints are being filed, about the outcomes, and a whole lot more. And the technology that we provide is important to create that foundation for accountability within a police department. And I think even more importantly, perhaps, transparency beyond. Both so the police departments are reporting data, but frankly, work with nonprofit and advocacy groups so they can get access to that data and they can analyze it as well. So, this is an area where there are clear things we need to avoid, including not providing facial recognition technology to police departments.
You've just announced you're not going to do, at least until there's a federal law regulating it, right?
Exactly. We have not been providing this kind of technology in this way. But we've said we won't provide it until there is the kind of law rooted in human rights that governs this technology on a national basis in the United States. But it's one more example of where technology has a lot of promise and holds out the prospect of peril. And the key thing for us as a tech company for this issue and so many others is constantly to be thinking about both sides of that equation.
And I don't want to do book promotion, but I should point out we're talking this language of tools and weapons. And Brad's book, Tools and Weapons, The Promise and Peril of the Digital Age, came out last fall, and it actually addresses a lot of the issues that we're talking about today in a lot of detail. So there aren't a lot of African Americans in so-called STEM jobs. And there's been a lot of attention to that over a period of time, but it's one of the things that's coming back again now that people are even talking more on the subject. Why is that, and what are the possible remedies? And are there things you're doing inside Microsoft, again, specifically so that more African Americans can be working in critical technology roles?
Well, first, I think you said something that's important. We don't have the representation that we should have as a nation or even as a world in terms of African Americans or more globally Blacks represented in the computer science and data science field, or I might add, in a number of other important professions. I've long worked on this issue myself, going back 10, 15 years in terms of the underrepresentation of African Americans in the legal profession.
Right.
When I look at the issues for, say, African Americans and Blacks in the United States and a field like computer science, the first thing I can't help but observe is, unfortunately, it starts early in terms of underrepresentation, and then it doesn't get better. So we see African Americans underrepresented in the AP computer science classes and exams of the country. Of course, the reason they're underrepresented when it comes to taking the class is because the class isn't as likely to be offered in the public high schools that African Americans attend. We've been working on this problem as a company. We have a program that gets volunteer teachers working with, say, a math or science teacher in a high school. I've had the opportunity to visit some really inspiring examples where there is great success. And what I've found, not surprisingly, is give people the opportunity to learn, they'll jump on it. But people don't have that opportunity enough. And that's just the first part of a multifaceted problem.
So let's talk about the new workplace, which is something on the mind of probably most people on this call as part of the conference. We're all dealing with it. And I think every company thinks it's dealing with it uniquely, but so many of the issues overlap. But just to start out, what percentage of Microsoft employees are working at home? And what's your approach to who can work at home and who can't?
Well, Washington State, where we have our headquarters and roughly 60,000 employees, so you think of 60,000 out of 160,000, was one of the first states in the United States to ask people to go home. And Microsoft was one of the first companies in Washington State to ask people to work from home. Every day since, we've had 2% of our employees in the office and 98% working from home. And that's been similar around the world. We're now reaching a point where we're starting to reopen, and we have been in sort of country after country. We're going back to work slowly, in part because more of our people can work from home. After all, if you create the technology that enables everyone else to work from home, it should be easier for your employees than most people to pursue that path. And that, in fact, has been what has been happening. I think we've all learned a huge amount. I think we've all learned that we can do more than we perhaps thought we could do in terms of sustaining productivity when this year began. And yet, I will say, I think we're also learning that we are human beings that benefit with being with other human beings. So even though we're very enthusiastic about the technology, we've seen something like Microsoft Teams and our Azure cloud services play critical roles, and we're working to innovate with these at quite a remarkable rate, I think. You're not going to hear me say, embrace the future, never leave your house ever again. I think we need to find what the new normal will be. I think we'll have a period of a hybrid economy while we await the broad vaccination. And then we'll see a future that will then be the rest of our lives. I think it will involve more remote everything, if you will, than we had before. But I do believe that it will also involve people being together, Collision, there will be a day where I believe, I hope that Collision might give the opportunity for people to spend some time talking with each other in person, and I think that will be good too.
Yeah. But if you were investing, would you invest in commercial real estate, or you assume there's going to be less commercial real estate because the balance is going to change?
Well, one of the things that I found really striking is just trying to learn from the past. There's two ways to think about commercial real estate. One is that we'll need less of it because everybody has found that they can work from home so productively. But there's another side of that. Look, one of the reasons that people have found that they can work from home as productively as in the office is because we've gone through 4 decades of taking offices and individual offices, and then we turned them into cubicles as a society, and then we turned the cubicles into defined workstations on tables, and then we told people, just find a spot on a table and bring your own laptop. You know what? It turns out that when you go that far, you can work just as effectively from home. So, I think there's lessons on both sides. We are creating technology that will make it easier for people to work from home. But look, maybe there's a little we lost over the last 3 or 4 decades by constantly reducing societally the amount of space that we were prepared to dedicate in the business environment so that people could work productively in the office.
Yeah. And we may end up needing to distance more anyway as we think differently about public health in the office going forward. Just quickly, in a very practical way, because I know everybody's dealing with this issue, how are you going to be managing going back? You're going to have A and B teams? Are you going to distance your offices? Elevators or lifts, depending on where you're watching from. A real issue if you're in a high rise. How practical it is to have 2 people in an elevator. You got to be your meticulous planners. You have to be planning this. Give us a little flavor of how you're planning it.
Yeah, we've had the benefit of having seen this unfold first in China and having several thousand employees in our offices in China. I would say we're going back to work carefully. We'll go back to the workplace slowly. And we will have to do all of the things that you just described to do it well. I think over time, we'll bring more people back. We'll see how quickly the pendulum moves to having more than, say, the first 10 or 20 or 25% of people back. We're all going to be learning. And I think we're all going to be following closely in the coming months. There are a few things that I would note. I think first, there's an important question that we're all going to see evolve over the coming months. We're thinking about it ourselves. How broadly should there be testing for asymptomatic individuals, employees, and the like? I think there's certain industry sectors where we will definitely see this. I think we'll see it in the food supply chain. We'll see it in motion picture production. We'll see it in sports leagues. We may well see it on some college campuses this fall. And we're asking ourselves, should we be thinking in some new ways about that? Second, we're definitely going to have a self-attestation app, as you would expect of a tech company. We've partnered with the United Health Group, UHG, to create technology that any employer can use so that before an employee comes to work, they attest as to their health condition that day. In addition, we're very much focused on the role of tracing and notification technology. We don't see an app-based approach as a silver bullet. It's not going to eliminate the need for or even the role of humans who are working as contact tracers, but I do think it is another layer of technology protection. And so we're working through how we will deploy these things. The one thing that we're very critically focused on is ensuring that as technology is used as a tool to manage the pandemic, we use it in a way that protects people's privacy. So we published early on 7 privacy principles. Everything that we're doing needs to conform with those privacy principles. We believe, in fact, we can put technology to work in a way that can advance public health goals and protect privacy at the same time. And I think that's a real and an important need everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that because it just struck me that in a crisis, we tend to put aside privacy a bit. It happened after 9/11 with security technology, maybe happening now with COVID-19. The emergency is so intense, you say we need to deploy tech solutions to solve a problem, and we kind of put privacy to the side, and I think there's a lot of concern with contact tracing and monitoring people's whereabouts. That's going to be a problem. But what you're kind of committing is that you will balance the privacy with the other concerns. Yeah,
absolutely, and I think that can be done.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of time. I want to ask you one more question because it really goes to the same issue of what happens in an emergency to one's other priorities. So you committed, I believe, in January to be carbon negative by the end of the decade. And climate change, we probably were all saying was the big, sort of super crisis of our time. And now we're focusing on some other things. Should climate change be less of a focus than it was now that we're focusing on COVID-19? And, kind of any thoughts about anything we're learning about climate change during the pandemic? And I'm afraid that will have to be our last question.
Well, one of the first decisions that we made, that I made in my work in March, is that we would not let up one bit in addressing climate issues. And I had an employee ask, why are we still focused on climate when we're trying to fight a pandemic? And my response was, we still need to save the darn planet. I think one easy bet is that COVID-19 is going to be discussed more than climate in 2020, but in 2030, we're going to be talking about climate, and we're probably not going to be talking about COVID-19. So we have continued to move forward. We launched a biodiversity and ecosystems initiative in April. We're going to be taking new steps in the next month to address issues around waste, and then new steps around carbon to build on what we announced in January. Technology has such an important role to play. Of course, we've all learned that if you have fewer cars that are driven by gasoline on the roads, it turns out that the air is cleaner. And I think that is in part, perhaps large part, an inspiration for us to move to the electrification of vehicles, among other things. But mostly we should just remember climate is one of the issues of the decade and the century. I think racism is one of the issues of the decade and the century. COVID-19 is hopefully one of the big issues of the first 2 or 3 years of this decade. And then we better remember what we've learned so that we keep in place the infrastructure to better protect us should it happen again.
Listen, thank you, Brad. This was really illuminating, and we've been speaking with Brad Smith at Collision from Home. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Some people meditate to relax, others listen to music. That means we've got the most chilled out session ever up next. Headspace CEO Rich Pearson is going to sit down with the iconic musician DJ Steve Aoki. They're going to discuss how in stressful times and even in the best of times, we all need to be sure to look after our mental health.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
Good.
Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Las Vegas.
Are you in Las Vegas?
Yeah. What about you?
I'm in Los Angeles at the moment.
All right, cool. We're not too far away from each other.
Yeah, not too far at all. So yeah, I was just, before we got on the call, you were talking about how I think you said you were 250 shows normally that you would do and like 300 days on the road. I'm just kind of curious, like how has that shift been for you, like mentally, to have such a different experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's okay now. I found like my balance. I think what I've realized through all this is that as long as I'm busy in my head, I'm cool. I'm cool and collected. It's kind of weird, like because my schedules are stacked now. So I just kind of run through my days. I have a schedule every single day. I wake up and I have something going on, and I prefer that. I don't like to just lay on the couch and Netflix, and like that would put me into like a bad place mentally. So I just need to be busy, being active. I'm making tons of music. I'm just using this time. Just like I'm just creating now. So when it's time to share it, I'll have like an arsenal of stuff to bring to the world. So I kind of have that, like, I'm always in that state, like when, especially when I'm on the road, when I come home, I have like a mission to finish songs, get my collaborations going. And I like that deadline vibe. I'm very much deadline oriented. So, yeah, it took me a minute to get to that place of like rhythm,
Yeah.
you know?
And what about in the creative process normally? Like if you think, I don't know, for me, normally ideas kind of come out of nowhere. You kind of can't plan them. Like the best ones just seem to kind of arrive. Like how have you found, and often you get inspiration when you're out and about in the world. Like, so how have you thought, how's the creative process and the inspiration piece been for you? Like, how's that different to being on the road, being in lockdown?
Yeah. So now since I don't have deadlines and it's a different mental space here. I'm experimenting more, which is great. I'm actually experimenting more, like not just in the studio, but in life.
Yeah.
I have time to experiment, try things out. Like it's been really exciting actually when I really think about this experimental phase I've been in, and I've allowed myself the time, and given the time, I mean we've all have to talk to all kinds of interesting people. You know, I was just talking before, as we were both talking about, like, you know, different things we're doing during COVID. I've been talking to different experts and like learning so much actually from your partner, Andy. You talked about meditation, and I meditate, but I wanted to learn more about it, but more importantly, like share it with all the fans that follow me. That's something that they can pick up, something that's not too difficult to do, and something that you could start in your routines in your day. But the sauna life, the cold plunges, the breath work, that's on a regular now. That's on a regular now, and I love it.
That's
I
great.
love that. You know, it's not just exercise on a regular, but like the cold plunges on a regular, which is, you know, something I'd only do like once every so often. Now I'm like, I have it ready. It's waiting for me downstairs. And I know I got my sauna cooking up too, so I can just get to that zone that Rhonda Patrick I learned. Dr. Rhonda Patrick told me about these heat shock proteins that develop in your body at a certain temperature during a certain amount of time. That basically stop plaque buildup in your cardiovascular system and also in your brain, that leads to dementia and Alzheimer's and memory loss and all kinds of brain malfunctioning. So just like incredible scientific information, inspirational information. So this experimental time outside the studio has been incredible, and experimental time in the studio has allowed me to create different kinds of music. And I've started an alter ego already, like, of, you know, another name I'm going to create later on and put out to the world.
That's
so
great.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I was saying, like, I think I found it difficult not having the human connection quite so much, and all my family in the UK, and like my mum's sick, and so that's tricky because I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back to the UK. Like I'm like everyone, like I just don't know when we're going to be able to travel. So I think sitting with that has been difficult. I'm here with my like wife and 6-month-old daughter, so that in a way has been, I feel really lucky that I've had that experience. And because of the work we do, I kind of feel very fortunate that we get to do the work that we do, because I think it's really, you know, having an impact at the moment. So all those things are great. I do feel a bit guilty. I don't know about you. I feel a bit guilty for those things when you see everything that's kind of going on in the world a little bit for me. But on the whole, it's been a very positive experience in lots of ways. And I've got to, you know, keep up my practice, and I've liked not having to travel all over the place. And I found it quite, like you, I found it quite a creative time.
Yeah.
But I know that's not everyone's experience, you know. I know that is, I'm kind of in a lucky spot. But on the whole, it's been manageable for sure.
I definitely have to concur on that. I'm very, very lucky to be able to afford a lifestyle that gives me all these different activities, and I'm just very fortunate because a lot of people don't have that kind of access to all these different things that you can do.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that when I was talking to these health experts or these experts is like, what are the alternatives if you don't have a sauna? What's the alternative if you don't have like a lot of ice, that you can put into a tub or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been it's I don't mind being home actually now anymore. I actually like look forward to doing all these fun things, and then soon we'll be able to get back to what we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I think the rollout for me as an artist, live entertainment, gatherings, festivals, those kinds of things, it's going to look differently, leading back to what we want it to look like.
Yeah.
But I think like these car kind of shows, or when you it's like you're in a car, like in a drive-in, and then you see an artist instead of seeing a movie. I think that's going to be something that I might be doing, for the time being. So
I'm just curious, like, when did you, as someone that's always been, I'd imagine if you're on the tour, if you're on the road all the time, you've constantly got new information coming in constantly, you saying you like to be busy, but the actual physical act of that makes it, very busy kind of naturally. When was it that you think, and I know you're really passionate about mental health anyway, and the work that you do with your foundation, like when was the time when you thought to yourself, like, was there a moment where you thought, you know what, I need to look after my mental health more? Like, it's not where I want it to be. Was there a particular moment in your life where you thought, right, I need to look at this?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had an interest in mental health, not so much on the breakdown of mental health that happens from a busy life, like what we're talking about right now. I have friends that have been so affected by touring that they've had to stop. There's actually a few DJs, one of which is Avicii, that, it was, touring life was not for him. And that sucks, because it sucks for him to be in that shoes where you have all these fans from all around the world that want to see you, but you don't want to go on stage.
Yeah.
And you've got so much pressure from like all different sides, from your team to the fans to everything. And you want to fulfill them. You want to make everyone happy, but it like tears your soul down.
Yeah.
That's so hard. It's so hard to living in those shoes. I never got to that point where it felt like that. So I feel very, very lucky that I didn't feel like that. I looked at it differently, but every brain is different. That's the thing.
Yeah. Everyone
has a different brain. We're born with different chemicals, different processes of how we see the world, how we are creative, how we deal with situations. But when you hear about situations like this, or any other things that happen like that, then my curiosity to dive in more into that space just gets deeper, goes deeper. And that's where, like, I'm lucky. I have a foundation, and there's a team in the foundation that I work with that we're lucky that we get to talk to different scientists and researchers, help raise money to find, eventual cures for any of these degenerative brain diseases, and how to cope with those things. There's like centers that deal with that, centers that help with the maintenance and like the coping.
Yeah.
Alongside finding the cures and then also I'm really curious about, where we're going in the future. How do we enhance our creativity more? How do we unlock the doors of our brain to allow us to dream up and find different ways where our imagination can become reality?
Yeah.
You know, like the sci-fi becoming science fact.
Yeah.
You know, and that's very exciting to me.
Yeah.
That's like actually a big thing. It's like I'm a big sci-fi guy. And you know, you always want to go like, what are the sci-fi ideas and principles that we could turn into science fact in our lifetime?
Yeah.
You know, and who are the people that are going to get us there? So whoever's going to get us there, I want to like jump on their back and like listen to what they have to say, or like find out like, you know, that information. That's like another passion of mine. But you know, either way, going back to what you're saying, sorry, I'm digressing here. So I am, yeah, I just, it's always been kind of an interest, you know, all that stuff.
But when you see it, like you got like a lot of fans, a lot of people that will listen to, you know, what you put out in the world, which is an incredible thing. And I suppose with mental health, you don't always know whether someone's got, well, often you don't, right? You can look at someone, the way they can pretend. You have no idea what's going on actually inside someone's mind. And I think one of the positive things that's come out of the situation is that there are conversations like the one that we're having today, where that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, probably wouldn't have happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And it seems that the situation has accelerated the conversation where people feel much more comfortable talking about it. And I think one of the really big benefits of that is if you are someone that's sitting at home and thinking that you're the only person that feels like that, all of a sudden you know that you're not the only person that feels like that. And there's something really powerful in that kind of connection. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, as you think about this like next stage of kind of creativity, like how in like you talk about sci-fi and like what do you think this next wave from this moment, from like once we get back to normal, what are the things that kind of excite you, either in accelerating a conversation or around creativity? Have you got anything in particular that you're kind of excited about the most?
I'm excited about how, like in general, how technology will help us. You know, in many ways it can control us, but I want to find out all the different ways that it can help us expand what we want to do with our creativity, with our lives, in the sense that, like, you know, like, can we produce more efficiently as a creator? I want to know. I mean, it's changed a lot since I first started making music, with these big studios that you needed to rent, or you had to rent to make music, to record music. If you weren't recording on a 4-track recorder and in your bedroom, it sounded like, you know, garbage. To now, it's like kids that are in their teens, like Billie Eilish, can create songs that shape culture, you know, creating a whole new genre of music in their bedrooms. That's the way, that's the world we live in now. Is the barrier of entry to make music is become so efficient and so mobile and so much easier than that people that don't have to have degrees, or don't have to have like 10 years under the belt, or don't have to have access to these big studios, can actually literally it told me what music I was listening to.
It's crazy.
Without having to say anything. I mean, that's wearing a non-invasive cap.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't drilled into my head. It's just a cap that you wear, and boom, it's just like it was reading my signals of what I was listening to, and it was able to Shazam and tell me what I'm listening to. You know, without saying anything. These things are going to become very normal.
Yeah.
Telekinesis, that's another like concept. The idea to move things with your mind. Those things are already happening. People are moving, like people that persons that are paralyzed can now move their wheelchairs, and they've been doing for 5 to 7 years. Move their wheelchairs with their mind. You know, it's like these are science fiction ideas I'm talking about that are becoming science fact. And I want to know what's happening from 2020 to 2030. Big shout out to all the scientists out there and researchers out there that are finding ways to find vaccines and find protocols so that we can get back to what we all love to do, is be, just like you said, connect back on the IRL. We want to see our families. We want to see our friends. We're a social species. We need to be like connecting at all times. And that's why Zoom is like, that's why people are saying that Zoom created COVID, is because everyone's Zooming,
Yeah.
It's like we can't see anyone outside of our homes.
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part, most people are respecting that rule. So I'm like always Zooming,
Yeah. When I often think about meditation as like a really ancient 2,500 year technology that's been like researched for 2,500 years. People say, oh, it's a fad, but well, it's been around for 2,500 years. That's quite a long fad. And I know we haven't got long left yet. But I'm just kind of interested in that, like I'm still really passionate about it's the human that drives the feeling, and technology can kind of augment it and help.
Absolutely.
And the heart is, in my opinion, like more important than the brain, and how those two things kind of link. And so I'm just, as a kind of closing thought, like, have you got any advice for anyone that might be, struggling out there, or struggling with their mental health, or thinking about things that they might want to do to make themselves feel better in this moment? Have you got any kind of quick tips for anyone?
Well, I agree with you. What you're doing, Richard, you're making meditation more accessible, which is the whole point of technology. The whole point of apps, the whole point of phones is the access to information. That's the first thing that I'm doing, is just learning. I'm just constantly learning about all these different ways to deal with stress levels, anxiety levels, just being alone. Luckily, I have a squad with me, but meditation is for sure one of the most important things. Absolutely one of the most important things. And out of all the different people I've talked to in this mindfulness marathon, everyone's saying the same thing. Being calm is where you want to be, because it's hard to get calm. So how do we be calm? How do we get to that chill place where we're making the right decisions in our lives? Meditation, breath work, the cold exposure, heat exposure, all these different things that actually don't cost any money. It's just like you need to find those places to get to these extremes, or to get to inside your head. And then you find the calm. You find the calm place, and knowing how to deal with extremes is being in that calm place.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time for the chat, Steve. And thanks
absolutely.
Thanks for all the work you've been doing, and good luck with the rest of the quarantine. Hopefully we'll see you in a concert in a car park soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard.
Take care.
All right.
Press the wall down. Hi, I'm Greg Peters.
I'm Laura Hale.
Hi, I'm Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Zach Ray.
Hi,
I'm Chad House.
I'm David Schneider.
I'm Kate Brand.
Kate Rosenbluth.
I'm Josh Sadowski, and welcome to Collision. I'm David.
I'm Kate Davidson.
My name is Hannah Schill.
Welcome to Collision from Home.
My name's Hugh. I'm the CEO of Verbs.ai. Verbs is an intelligent dictation platform for busy people like you. rapidly assign tasks, capture meeting notes, create documents, and collaborate with your team using just your voice. Turn conversations into action and be more awesome at work.
Welcome back to Collision from Home. You're watching Channel 3. It's great to have you with us. It's time to hear from some of the biggest brands and marketers this hour. How do long-standing brands stay relevant in the digital age? Some of the world's top companies combine their heritage and culture with innovation and tech. In conversation with Co-M from Adweek, let's hear from the Chief Brand Officer of General Mills, Brad Hiranaga, and the President of Brands at Beam Suntory, Jessica Spence.
Welcome to Leading a Legacy Brand, and I'm Co. I'm joined by Jessica and Brad. Thank you for both of you for being here today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Co.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So you two both lead legacy brands as president and president of brands. How have the first 6 weeks of COVID-19 been for you? What were kind of your immediate actions and needs? Let's start with Brad.
Yeah, the time's been crazy. 6 weeks ago seems like 6 years ago, I'm sure, for everybody. You know, as a big global food manufacturer, our role in this has been really interesting. We've always been a company that supplies food to the masses throughout, the United States, but also just throughout the world. And for us, we really pivoted. We've had this purpose for a long time about serving the world food that people love. And we found our role very quickly to be in a position of serving food that the world actually needs right now. And so for us, the real primary focus was ensuring that we were making food as quickly as possible, getting it out distributed to all of our customers so that they had food on their shelves. So as people came in looking to stock up, looking to get access to food, that they'd be able to do so. So for us, that really became the crystal focus, and every single day was about making sure that we were delivering that. From a marketing perspective, I'd say we were going down this path, but it really started to accelerate us in a way that I'm, that's probably the silver lining for this, which is we were always trying to be have our brands in a position where they were solving consumer problems, and doing that in a way that was really action led by creating things that added value to those problems. I think through the COVID crisis, it accelerated that because people's problems became very apparent really quickly. They're very basic. And so our brands really had to pivot in terms of how they were showing up to be contextually helpful to people in solving those needs. So if it were, how do I use the items I only have in the fridge because now I'm on a really tight budget because my spouse has lost their job. It's about creating content that helps solve that problem. Or if it was now I'm at home with my kids, 24/7. What are things that I can do to pass the time? How can I learn how to cook or learn how to bake? I don't know how to do that. And so we really started to think about our creating experiences and content around those problems. And for us, that was a way that we could add value in addition to making food was available. And so going forward, I think that idea of truly adding value to any situation is only going to be more present in everything that we do. I think there was a lot of, whereas before maybe there was room for companies to show up in different ways that weren't adding value. I think that consumers know what they're looking for, and so we have to be there in a way that's really solutions oriented.
Right, and especially at the beginning, I think consumers were leaning into familiar brands, and those consumers will remember what the legacy brands did during this time. You mentioned, talking about filling those basic needs and also serving a very simple message that people could comprehend and consume. Jessica, you also saw that people had various needs at the pyramid level, and you also leaned into more of that doing, that action. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, obviously, I smiled when Brad was saying it feels like 6 years ago. It really does. But for us, this has been a huge shock, obviously, to the industry because our brands lie at the heart of experiences, and those experiences are often very social. They're often about people connecting with each other, about people being together, and they often take place in bars and restaurants. There's also moments of celebration, moments of partying. And we've really seen a massive shift in the needs people are having. And I think, Brad's point about staying close to what are people needing, what is changing in their lives has been really critical for us. So we've been really focused on that. But what we also realized is, of course, alongside trying to make sure that our brands were being there and showing up in a way that was relevant to those new needs. We have a huge industry and community that is all of the bartenders, the restaurant owners, the mixologists across the US and across the world, who we really think of as part of our family. They are the people who often introduce our brands. They're the face of our brands quite often. They're often the best storytellers about our brands. And we've been focused a lot on what can we do to support them, because this is an incredibly tough time. That's an industry that's been harder hit, honestly, than our immediate one. And we have really leaned into what can we do there. So I think, like actually a lot of our peers, we've been focusing on what does support for the bars and restaurants, the hospitality sector really look like. Is finding ways for them to share content with their customers, so they're still being able to create some of the experiences, which for a lot of them it's not a job, it's what they love doing. Whether that's creating cocktail classes for people to spend time in, whether that's joining up and being present with us in tastings, whether that's us doing reach out to make sure that people who are struggling from that community have access to hot meals and the basic support that they might need. So we've really been spending a lot of time making sure that we're there for consumers, but also we're there for that really critical community that means so much to us.
Yeah. Would you say that for both of you, as legacy brands, as protectors and cheerleaders of legacy brands, that the pressure and the responsibility is greater? And whatever your answer is, where do you go to for inspiration and for the alignment that you're doing the right thing? Do you look to the past? Do you tap into, going back into your initial mission? Kind of walk us through that. Brad, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think the great thing about having brands that have been around for a long time is they've got a great history. And being from companies like Jessica and I are that have that, you definitely can reach back to help you understand how you need to go forward. And so for General Mills, it's been a company that's been around for 150 years, and so certainly as a company, it's had lots of stories in the past. And one story in particular that's been told often is there was one of our plants on the Mississippi River had an explosion and it killed a number of employees, and it was obviously devastating to the company. But the company went back and they figured out what went wrong and really updated a lot of the processes within the manufacturing facilities. And not only did they put that into the next plants that they built, but they shared it with the rest of the industry, so competitors and everybody else, so that it would keep all plant workers safe. And it was funny, you told that story before, but it's really become part of the roots of what I think General Mills tries to stand for. And internally, we have a rallying cry of trying to be a force for good that's been around for a while. And so that shows up, I think, in all of our brands, and always has showed up in all of our brands. But the crisis, I think, really puts it more to the forefront than ever before. And so, if we have a brand like Cheerios, role is to be a positive cheerleader no matter where it's at. And so in good times, that looks different than it does in times right now, but people certainly need more positivity, and there's kids that are hungry, and there's schools that are shutting down. So how can Cheerios show up in those moments to take action and do good through the lens of being positive and spreading kindness when people need it? And that looks different from a brand like Betty Crocker, which has been around for a long time as well, but was born out of this, a woman who was educating people on how to take care of their homes when it was wartime in the United States. And so how do you bring that forward and do it in a way that's going to be true to the roots of the brand, but also adding value in the current context of what's happening in people's lives today? And so I think for sure, those brands give you lots of stories to create. I think what's really cool about this situation, if you're looking for a positive, is that these are the stories, I think, how brands are showing up. And I love the story that Jessica told about doing good for their stakeholders, that I do think people are going to talk about in future generations when they're looking how to navigate the brands in the future. And so that's really what I feel like we're doing day in and day out by creating new stories, by again, solving these problems that our consumers or our customers are dealing with.
Yeah, especially for experiences, right? Jessica, that's something that people really have cemented in their memories.
No, absolutely. And I mean, for me, it's been incredibly, oddly, I guess, comforting to have brands which have got such long histories, because when we were talking as a team, when all of this started, we remembered back and we looked through all of our brands, many of them more than 200 years old, and they've all faced things before. we've all been through the storms. And we did actually spend a little bit of time just thinking about each of the brands and some of the challenges they'd had. And a wonderful story on Jim Beam, obviously prohibition, kind of a major shock. We were up and running 120 days after that. So I think we really dug deep and we went back to what are those stories? What are those moments when we've done this before, when we've been there before? And what are the values that we showed in those times that we want to be showing now? And I think that's been really helpful for us to give us a bit of a guiding light, because I think one of the challenges in this time, if I look at a lot of the things I'm seeing out there, it's beginning to look a little bit like wallpaper. I think if I see one more ad with soft piano music in the background and a deserted city and people on Zoom calls in their homes together, kind of all begins to really look the same. And I'm not sure how much I need that bit of my life played back to me right now. So knowing what your brand is, knowing what your perspective is, your point of view, and the values you have that are unchanging, I think is so important, because if you're going to be marketing, you're going to be doing things right now, you're going to be trying to connect to consumers, all of the rules of being distinctive and standing out still hold. And I think it's really helped us to have legacy brands with that strong history, that strong backbone that you can call on at moments like this to make sure you're not just fading in to the wallpaper of what everyone is trying to do right now.
Right. And now we have this white paper kind of in front of us, the road ahead, right? What is your guiding light or your main takeaway for the big overview picture as we kind of close out this session? Brad?
Well, I think a lot of the lessons that we're learning right now, which were maybe showing up intermittently for us or for other brands, where they were going back and trying to say, how can we do good? How can we be action led? It felt almost kind of like, well, I got to do cause marketing, so I'll do those things. I think those are the front and center way for brands to really show up now, going forward for the foreseeable future. And we've used the term, humanizing the way that we want to grow. And I think, for all marketers, they always have to know who their consumers are and what they're facing. But that's always, I don't think that's never more important than it is right now, in trying to understand, really showing up in a way that's human. And I think that also extends beyond our consumers. That extends to the way that we're working with each other in our companies and with our partners externally, is everyone's going through this ordeal kind of together. And so the way that we can show up as humans and be empathetic to one another and what people are going through, to me, that was something that, again, trying to look for the silver linings in the situation, that was kind of sorely needed. I think it was easy to not to ignore the human factors of what was happening. And I look in the United States, in a country that was very divided. Well, now everybody's going through the same things. And so how do we show up as brands and as marketers that can lead these companies to really, truly, grow our businesses, but do it in a way that does good for the communities that we live in, for the planet that we live on, for the future generations that are going to come forward. And I think, these brands that have been around for a long time, they have a role to play. And I think a lot of time they could be overlooked as new brands were coming up. Well, they're the brands that are truly the backbone of some of these economies in these countries. And I think for the future, it's really exciting to come into these brands and figure out, like, how do I take that and create growth in the future based off this brand by solving these problems in new and different ways. People are truly looking for companies that understand them and brands that offer a human solution to them.
Yeah. Jessica, any other silver linings?
I think for us, it has really accelerated some of the things we're already seeing. So, I mentioned our brands sit at the heart of moments when people come together. And we've been doing a lot of really interesting thinking about what does that experience look like in the new world? And how does the collision of technology reaching the point that it's at with the sudden changes we've had actually create some really interesting creative opportunities where perhaps the way that we connect, the way that we socialize becomes digital first. The opportunities with augmented reality, the opportunities for people to be using technology to change their mood, to connect, to create circles and family feelings in a completely different way. And that's somewhere which I've always been excited about, but this is kind of really brought to the front. So I'm seeing a lot of opportunity to explore and to have some fun with some of that.
Yeah, well, I look forward to what both of you do in the year forward, as we continue to look forward and continue to kind of appreciate the silver linings. Thank you so much, Brad and Jessica, for your time and your insight.
Thank you so much.
As brands aim to be more socially responsible, how can you promise transparency and conscious behavior all the way down to the supply chain? Here to tell us about how a circular business model can make sustainability a reality, let's welcome H&M's Chief Sustainability Officer, Anna Gedda.
Welcome to Collision from Home, and hi Anna. To start off with, why don't you tell me a little bit about how lockdown has been affecting your business?
Right. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, obviously, the current situation has affected all parts of our business. Luckily, during the past couple of weeks, many of our markets have started to open up, so we have been able to also reopen stores. But when things were at the worst, we actually had 70% of all our physical stores closed down. So, and that impacts the whole organization, of course. We have colleagues who are not able to go to work. We have high stock levels. We, of course, have impacts in our supply chain. And of course, customers who are not able to visit the stores, but more importantly, are worried for their own health and don't have opportunity to go to their jobs, for example. So until a couple of weeks ago, we really were deeply impacted by the current situation. But as I said, luckily now we start to see that many of the stores can reopen and that we're getting not back to normal, of course, but to a new kind of normal at least. So today, around 70% of our stores are actually open. So, I mean, that is a good step in the right direction.
And you mentioned the sort of the impact on business from a business perspective, but what about from a sustainability perspective? How is that going to impact on your sustainability goals, and what challenges has it created in the sustainability field?
So I think, I mean, to start with, when this crisis hit, we were very, of course, putting people first was our top priority, both when it comes to our own colleagues, the health of our customers, of course, and also the people who are touched by this in our supply chain. So a lot of our focus was put on finding ways of mitigating that impact and making sure that we can provide both a safe work environment for our colleagues, but also making sure that our supply chain was as little impacted as possible. I think now going forward, we can start seeing changes in customers' behaviors and expectations, which in many ways are also positive. People have started to think even more about what is really important, and I believe we can see an emergence for even more focus on sustainability. Obviously, still on the climate and the resource use agenda, but I think that this crisis has also led to a continued or an increased focus also on the social agenda. What the role of jobs really mean in the communities where we are, how important it is for people to have a community around them and the solidarity that you feel from the people that you have. So in that sense, I think that we're going to see a bigger focus, but slightly changed when it comes to sustainability.
When it comes to your staff, all the way down the production chain, you obviously have a very ambitious target to pay 100% fair living wage through your chain. How has that been impacted in a climate in which we're seeing a lot of criticism leveled at the fashion industry for cancellation of orders and lack of payments feeding down the chain during lockdown?
So, I mean, as I said, every part of the organization has been impacted, so has also the supply chain. And how we have worked in our supply chain and making sure that we support our suppliers in providing fair jobs and also good working conditions for the workers have been key in our strategy ever since we started almost 20 years ago. So obviously, that commitment is even more important in times of crisis. We've also been clear that we have stuck to our contractual commitments and making sure that we uphold those against our suppliers, and that we've also worked together with the industry and the ILO to find ways of how we can help our suppliers and the workers to lessen the impact of the current situation. By, for example, looking at what are new ways of finding finance to provide social security and to cover maybe loss of payments to workers during this current time. And I think that, I mean, this goes to say for kind of all different sustainability topics right now, that it's not up to just one single company to try to solve it. I think what we have learned is how dependent we are on the world around us and on this industry. So I think that these kind of collaborations that we start to see, where the industry is coming together to find new solutions to these challenges, are also going to be the foundation that we can build a new future on.
You mentioned there that you are currently sitting on very high stock levels, as is common across the industry at the moment. What sort of challenges does that present from a sustainability point of view, and how do you tackle that situation?
Yes, I mean, of course, this was an unexpected turn of events. So for quite some time, we had really high stock levels. And of course, we have a very strong commitment towards becoming circular. And that means, of course, that we utilize the value of all the products and make sure that they last as long as possible and can be used as much as possible as well. So when it came to our stock levels, we had to use the same approach also there. And of course, I mean, we have been able to work with different kinds of solutions, everything from making sure that we can find ways of relocalizing the stock between different markets and different stores, but also seeing how we can use different parts of our business. For example, Afound, which is one of our outlet brands, and use them as a way to also sell some of the stock we have. But of course, the most important thing here is that nothing goes to waste, and that we have been very clear with both internally and also to our partners. So very happy to work with many great collaboration partners that can also help to continue to make sure that the value of the stock remain.
Obviously, that plays into your aims to get towards a completely circular business model. Can you explain to me a bit about what circularity means to you and what it looks like for a business like H&M?
Right. So good question. And I think when many think about circularity, they think about recycling, but obviously circularity is about so much more than that. I think many are familiar with the concept. Today we have very much a linear economy where we dig up things, we use them and we throw them away. In a circular economy, it's really about making sure that we continue to use the same resources over and over again to keep them in the loop. So that means that it goes, circularity for us is the whole life cycle of a product. It's about how you design, what material do you use, how is it processed, and also when the product is with the customer, how does the customer take care of the product and make sure that it lasts as long as possible, and then ultimately making sure that nothing goes to waste but is being brought back into the system once the product is no longer wanted, so to say. So our aim is, of course, to have a fully circular system where we can work to address all the different parts here, from design all the way to how it's being brought back into the system. So far, we have worked with all the different parts. We have a really ambitious material goal. 2030, all our materials should either be sustainably sourced or recycled, and today we are at 59%. And steadily increasing. And we have also started to explore different kinds of circular business models like re-commerce and rental, and also different kinds of repair solutions. Everything to make sure that the product can last as long as possible.
Obviously, as a business of your scale, when you discuss these issues, quite often you're faced with accusations of greenwashing. How do you deal with that, and how do you convince consumers that you're on the right path?
Yes, I think there is, of course, a skepticism towards the fashion industry in general. And I think that makes me even more eager to show that it is possible to actually have a sustainable fashion company, and that there are solutions to get there, where we, being one of the bigger players, both have an opportunity but a responsibility to lead the way towards that. I think luckily, I mean, we have had ambitions for quite some time. We're also still very much a family-owned company, so it means that we can have quite a long-term perspective when we look at where we want to go and our investment frames and so on. And I think that has really helped to kind of spell out the way of where we want to go and keep to that roadmap, even in times of crisis like we are right now. Of course, I mean, I think the key here is to make it easy for customers to do the right thing, to customers to be informed, but also to be able to, without too much free knowledge, just be able to make sustainable choices. And of course, make that also available and affordable to many. I think maybe one of the biggest misconceptions in this industry is that sustainability is something that is expensive or that it should be exclusive. And I really think the opposite in that sense, because if we want to change this industry, sustainable fashion or sustainable products cannot be something for a selected few. It has to be something that is available for the many. And that's kind of what I see as our call, and what I really want to show that we can lead the way for.
How big a part of reaching that fully sustainable goal and in encouraging consumers to make better choices does it mean that you have to change your business model?
So, I mean, obviously, in our ambition to become fully circular, it's all about that, making sure that we can reinvent ourselves and the business model that we have, and find ways where we can continue to provide, great looking products and clothes for our customers to help them to have a sustainable lifestyle, but of course, doing that in a way that is within the planetary boundaries. So, a lot of it really comes down to our circular vision and how we can make sure that we don't just add new resources that the planet can't afford, but rather use what is already there, use our and the industry's creativity and ingenuity to find new solutions and to make that possible. And I think, right now, a lot of the challenges have been maybe not really the lack of innovation, but the scale of that innovation, how we can connect the dots. But over the past couple of years, we have really seen some great progress when it comes to, for example, recycling technologies or new innovative materials and even new types of models. So here we want to use the scale that we have to be able to take this to the next level, and also in the future to be able to connect the dots so that we can have a whole new type of circular supply chain. And I think once we have that, we will also have a whole new type of business models that make it possible to enjoy fashion, but not at the expense of the planet.
How do you go about educating consumers on how their choices impact into that, and how big a role does technology play in allowing people to get access to the information that they need to do so?
Yeah. So, right now, one of the big focus areas for us, and has been for quite some time, is the role of transparency. And that can sound a bit fluffy, but it's really about being open and honest about how and where products are being made and making that information accessible to consumers, because then they become more aware about the products that they want to buy. And of course, with that, they also get a lot more information about how it's being made. And obviously, it becomes easier to make better choices. And last year, we actually introduced a whole new transparency layer to all our products. So it means that you can go into any product online and you can find out not only in just which country it has been made, but also in which type of factory. And also a lot of information about the material that has gone into it and how you can care for the product. So I think that's one way of how we have tried to connect the technology enablers that we have at hand right now with our customers and create value in enabling them to be able to make better choices and to know more about the product that they buy. And I think that is great for many customers who want to dig into that kind of information. But there are also many customers who just want to do the right thing. So I think it's important that we cater to all kinds of customer needs in this way, and that no matter what you buy, you should feel safe that this is a sustainable product made in a sustainable way. So that is kind of my end in mind and where we want to go in the future.
Now, you're one part of a much bigger puzzle. You've touched on recycling, on technology. How much can you drive change as an individual business, and how much are you reliant on political and systemic change to make your goals a reality?
Yeah. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have right now. If it was only up to us, I think we would have solved a lot, but we are not there yet. And I think that many people think that, the H&M group is super huge. We are, but we're only 2% of the market. So if we're really going to create change, we need the other 98% to work with us as well. But obviously, this depends on more than just our industry. A lot of the challenges that we face are maybe on a country level or on a whole regional level. So to address these types of issues, you need to work with policymakers and governments and others. And to be more concrete, I think one good example is when it comes to climate, which is one of the biggest challenges, not just for our industry, but for the whole world. Today, our supply chain is based in many countries that are based on coal grids. So whatever energy that they use is based on fossil fuels. And obviously, even if we want to change our supply chains and make sure that our suppliers only use renewable energy with a grid and an infrastructure like that, it is simply not possible for us just to make that change. So that's why it's so important to work together with others, both within our industry and outside, to really get to that core of the problem and how we can solve it together.
H&M has been piloting some fairly forward-thinking models recently in terms of rental, recycling of clothing, repurposing clothing. How do you plan to roll those out, and how does that impact on the way that you design and make clothes to allow for a multi-consumer market?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been really great test that we have started to do, both as you said around rental, but also re-commerce and repair and refurbishment. And these are all parts of our ambition to become circular in the future. Our future business model will need to include these different types of businesses, so to say. And we are learning so much as we are doing this about how this works with customers, but also what the actual impact on both climate and resource use is, and of course, what kind of business potential that is in there. So what we're doing right now is just continue to test and to evaluate to see what parts are relevant to scale to make sure that we really reach the impact that we want to see. And of course, super exciting to be part of this journey because this is really where the future is.
We were discussing before we started filming today about the changes that we expect to see in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. How do you think that it is going to change consumer behaviour? And do you think that that will have a positive impact on the sustainability agenda?
Yes, so I think it's a really good question, maybe the $1 million question, what I think it's going to look like in a year from now. I for sure think it's going to change customers' behavior in general. I mean, the digital shift has really accelerated, and we can really see that in our business, for example, with digital sales going up and many customers have started to shop online for the first time, for example. I think in terms of sustainability, we can also see that customers start to become even more aware about the sustainability impact that what they buy has. I think it comes back to that in a crisis like this, to start to think about what is really important to you and how do you want to live your life in the future. And as I also said before, I think the emergence of the social agenda, the role that jobs play in a community, how important it is to be able to make a living. I think we're going to see a lot of efforts in kind of getting that back on track. But at the same time, doing that in a way that builds on a green recovery, where we take the learnings and the work already has been done around both circularity and combating climate change, and do our best to make sure that when we start up the economy, we do that with a different intent, with a different vision in mind. So I think, it's really about combining this equinox in a way of how we can cater for the needs of all those people and provide jobs, but doing so in the planetary boundaries. And that question has never been more urgent than what it is right now.
To conclude, the title of this talk is Sustainability Beyond Greenwashing. What would your message be to those who think that big fashion companies do not have a place in this movement, that this is, it's one or the other, you can't be big and be sustainable?
Well, I would say that to be sustainable, you have to be big in a way, or if you really want to create change, because I think it is, there are so many great ideas out there, but if we want to transform not just a company, but a whole industry, if we want to transform how customers are using their clothes and how they view what they wear and how they contribute to a sustainable future, then you also need the scale. And I think that in the future, our industry will consist of an ecosystem with both big and small players working together to make that happen. So, I get a lot of inspiration from many of the small players that are out there. But I think to really take this to scale and to change the industry, you need that kind of size. And it's also why I see that we have a responsibility with the business that we have, but also a great opportunity to be able to lead this change.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Our generation are going through a period where access to information is very, very easy.
Data has replaced oil as the new key to success.
It's really a double-edged sword.
It's a data game. We're going to start to see consumers wanting to take back a lot more control. And I think that's going to provide a lot of opportunities for innovation and a lot of challenges.
The rise of Asia technology is one of the great stories of the current age.
Conferences like this only make it more of a magnet for the tech startup scene.
That conversation that happens because of this event, I think is going to be increasingly important for the world.
Coming to Rise is about being inspired, about being challenged.
This opportunity to learn
Brings together so many different types of people.
We are going to get better as humanity only when we work together.
Our next speaker's story was turned into a movie last year called Bombshell. Speaking with Samantha Berry from Glamour, Gretchen Carlson joins us next to give her inside take on the Me Too movement, the political landscape, and the future of TV news.
Gretchen, thank you so much for joining this conversation today. We've a lot to get through, but I want to start where a lot of your heart and your passion and your focus has been of late, and that is around Lift Our Voices, which you founded, and really it is devoted to stopping companies using NDAs, using arbitration, really silencing voices. What have the wins been? How's that been going for you?
Wow, we just launched in December, and immediately we had so much traction because so many women and men all across the world have been affected by being silenced. There are 60 million just Americans who have arbitration clauses in their employment contracts, meaning that if they have a problem at work, they can't go to an open court system. They go to this silent chamber called arbitration. Millions of others have non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. And why this is so important to me is because this is how sexual harassment has been solved in the workplace in America and in other countries for far too long. I really believe that in creating Lift Our Voices, with our mission to eradicate arbitration and NDAs, that if we are successful, we will change the landscape of the American workplace. And that's saying a lot because that's a lofty goal, but I believe we can get there. We will eradicate harassment in the workplace if we can do this, and we will change how the workplace operates with regard to women for current generations and all future generations.
You talk about the American workplace, and I think we've seen, and I want to go back in a little while to your personal story, but we've seen the conversations around NDAs in particular play out in Hollywood. We've seen it play out in media companies. We've seen it play out on the political stage of late. What are the other industries that are using these that to a large extent that we need to start shining a light on?
Yeah, so, the whole movement that I helped to ignite 4 years ago, before Me Too happened 15 months later. Listen, we were not talking about this very much. I didn't even realize that harassment in the workplace was a pervasive epidemic. But then I started hearing from thousands of women all across this country and the world. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is in every profession, from police officers to firefighters to teachers to lawyers. I've heard from oil rig operators. I've heard from airplane mechanics. It's everywhere. And it also crosses every socioeconomic background, every race. And so I realized I had to do something about this. And that's when I wrote my book, Be Fierce. And that's when I started, lobbying all the politicians in Washington, D.C. to start changing laws to help women. It's when I went on a college campus tour to get to our young people. Listen, fixing this problem is not easy. I always say it's a tangled web. But over the last 4 years, we have come so far. And that's why every morning I wake up and I'm optimistic to change this world for future women. So it affects all of us, Sam. It's not just famous people and well-known people. And that is really what's so important in solving this, that it can affect anyone.
And the Collision audience is often startups and those in tech and those that are new entrepreneurs. What are you seeing in this world of NDAs, arbitration, silencing from big and small tech companies? And then also if those people listening along from Collision at home are starting their company, how can they go in and start a culture that doesn't include these?
Thank you. Well, how much time do you have? Because answering those questions is like huge. But I will say that the tech industry, there's two sides to this. We've heard a lot of horrible stories about harassment and gender discrimination and race discrimination within the tech industry. But at the same time, some of the companies in the tech industry have really gotten on the right side of history. And that's what I like to call it. So instead of passing legislation to force them to get rid of arbitration and NDAs, they've actually done it on their own. I would like to point out that Microsoft did it first in December of 2017. They took away arbitration clauses. And then Uber did it, and Lyft did it, and then Airbnb, and then eBay. Then you had the Google walkout. And that was monumental on so many fronts because it showed that one woman can make a difference, but together we rock the world, one of my favorite quotes, in an international day. That was about arbitration clauses and paying out predators big time money. The next day, Google took arbitration clauses out of their contracts. So look, there has been sort of this domino effect in the technology world, but we have a long way to go on that. With regard to startups, I would just go back to that quote that I said, that one person can make a difference. We've seen that happen in all of these movements. And it really does matter that the person who's starting this company or from the top on down sets the tone for the culture. Imagine if the person leading the company gathers everyone together and they say, the buck stops with me and I am not going to allow this. And if a woman has the courage to come forward, I am going to celebrate her. Imagine how that changes the dynamic from how women experience harassment in the workplace now, where when they finally have the courage to come forward, they're shunned, they're blacklisted, they're demoted and fired. And in many cases, the predator gets to keep working. And because of these silencing mechanisms, nobody ever knows anything about it. So it's crucial that the person at the top sets the tone.
You talk a little bit there about a personal story, a one-person story. You have one that played out in mass media over the last, 18 months. Your story played out in the Loudest Voice. Your story played out, which was the Showtime series. It's played out in theaters around the world with Bombshell and Charlize Theron and Nicole Kidman. I know there's certain things because of NDAs that you can't talk about. Can you tell me what it was like to see your story played out on national media?
I know, Sam, it was so surreal because hindsight truly is 2020. When I jumped off the cliff by myself and filing my lawsuit against Roger Ailes at Fox News, July 6, 2016, how would I have known that eventually there were going to be a Showtime miniseries and a movie? If I would have known that what I did would help to ignite this movement, I would have fought so hard to also not sign the NDA. But I didn't know. And I also didn't know that it meant that I wouldn't be able to consult with either of the actresses, Naomi Watts or Nicole Kidman, who were playing my role, or with the movie makers, or with journalists for that matter. I can't even tell you, Sam, if those portrayals of me are accurate. That's how muzzling NDAs are. And listen, the creation of Lift Our Voices is not about Gretchen Carlson. The creation of this organization is about the millions of other women across this world who need help to not be silenced anymore. So while I wish I could have participated in these projects, if even one woman gets the courage to come forward from watching these films or this miniseries, then I believe that it's worth it.
When we talk about silencing NDAs, arbitrations, it makes me think about as well what's happening in the world around us, especially in the last couple of weeks with Black Lives Matters, with systemic racism in the police system in the US. What would you like to see in the government institutions when it comes to accountability and conversation and justice, really?
Thank you for bringing that up, because I really believe that these movements that we're seeing in the United States are all related in a way. You had women who finally found their voice with regard to discrimination and harassment, and that moved into the Me Too movement, that moved into the women's marches all across the world for that matter. I mean, I truly believe that led into when the Parkland shooting happened in Florida at that high school, that the kids felt like their voice mattered and they came together and also spoke up. And now we've moved into police brutality and the systemic racism with the way in which African Americans are treated. All of these movements, they now are getting their voice, right? I really don't think there's any turning back. And there are a tremendous amount of parallels. There are arbitration clauses also in many police departments which keep these situations silent. There are bystanders who watch these things happen, either within the police department or outside, just like in the workplace, witnessing harassment, and they don't say anything. There are so many parallels to these movements that I get great joy every morning knowing that our country and the world is going to become a better place because of the time that we find ourselves in, where people's voices matter.
And we're talking about organizations there. We've seen NDAs, which is, I think, become something that everybody in the world knows what it means in the last, 2 years plus. But that wasn't the case beforehand. We've seen that play out in the political stage as well. We saw it out in the Democratic stage when Mike Bloomberg was asked by Elizabeth Warren to release people from their NDAs. Is this something you want to see across the aisle, that no politician, no government, no agency uses NDAs?
Yeah, well, first of all, harassment, discrimination, racism, it's apolitical. That's my main message. And it's why we should all come together to try to solve all of these issues, because they are apolitical. But listen, lift our voices. Because of our movement that started in December, we believe that we were instrumental in getting that question on the debate stage for the first time in 22 years that they actually asked about non-disclosures. Why? Because our movement had so much force behind it in the months before that debate. Also that morning, we released an op-ed in the Des Moines, Iowa Register newspaper, and they were taking part in that debate. So then they asked the question. It was crucial. My kids were at home. They were cheering with me. They were like, "Mommy, they're asking your question." And, look, I'm not looking to have any political candidate fall down as a result of it. No one knew how Elizabeth Warren was going to then take that question and jump on it and basically eviscerate Mike Bloomberg with it. But listen, we need to have this conversation. Also, Lift Our Voices went to every presidential candidate and we said, sign our petition. Sign on to Lift Our Voices to eradicate NDAs. And we got almost every presidential candidate except for Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Amy Klobuchar, and Mike Bloomberg.
And finally, Gretchen, before we get to this, I want to talk about what's next for you, because Lift Our Voices is there very much front and center, but there's a couple of exciting projects coming back. We're going to see you back in the interviewer's chair.
Yes, well, thank you so much for asking. Listen, I was in the television business for more than 25 years, and I believe that it's so important that I go back to doing what I love, my craft, so that I can serve as a beacon of hope for all of these other women who tragically never work again in their chosen profession when they have the courage to come forward. So I have done documentaries for A&E Networks, and now I just signed a new production deal with Blumhouse Productions, and we're going to be selling an interview show. And I also have 2 other big sort of media announcements that are going to be upcoming at the end of the summer. So I'm juggling a lot of different things, but I feel like my advocacy work and then also the career that I love, I can do them in tandem.
Great. Very excited to hear about those. Gretchen, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Across the Western world, there's massive discontent and anger.
We have legalized the abuse of the person.
We need equality, and I don't want to feel like I have to wait for that. I want it right now.
There are many challenges and opportunities facing us at this moment.
If we get it wrong, every generation that follows us will pay a price.
The future is not a solo act. It will take all of us working together.
Our next speaker is a World Economic Forum young global leader and a BBC Africa business editor. He's also got 7.9 million followers on Twitter, which climbs to nearly 4 million if you include Facebook and Instagram. And he's only 32. Larry Maddow joins us now to explain how to use social media effectively.
Hi, okay, well, let's get started. Larry, what came first, your journalism career or your social media presence?
The journalism career kind of enabled the social media presence, but I guess at this point they're really married into each other that it's hard to tell them apart. And I've enjoyed them being in that way for as long as I can remember.
Give us an idea of your following across social media platforms.
One doesn't do these things, Michelle. It's like picking your favorite child. So it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing because I've got about, I think, 1.8 million or so on Twitter, 1.8 million followers, over 1 million on Instagram and Facebook, and it all kind of grew so fast. I remember when I joined Twitter 11 years ago today. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
11 years ago, and for a while I didn't have any followers. And I'm just like, I'm shouting into the ether. Nobody's listening to me. And then after a while, it just started growing up super fast, and I couldn't make sense of that. And so now it's a useful thing to get story ideas, a useful thing to engage with my audiences, it's a useful thing to get feedback. And I just wrote something for the BBC, and I got one of my favorite comments back from a reader who said, "This is an imbecilic piece of tripe ever written." And I was just like, so kind of you.
I personally am impressed that your followers have such extensive vocabularies. So, frankly, I find it noteworthy. All right, but really, I think what people want to know, what journalists want to know is, do you have this massive following because you are on the BBC? Or did your massive following build organically, and then your journalistic presence supported that, helped build it further?
It's when people were starting media outlets around the world, journalists were starting to bring people in on Facebook and on Twitter especially, and show them these are the questions I needed, or I was looking to speak to this person. So just as these platforms were starting to blow up, I was also kind of testing my feet there and trying to get a sense of them. And I think that helped a lot of people understand how the news was made, why we interviewed the guests that we did, or also to call me out when they think I didn't do a good job in a story or an interview and say, you should do better, you should think of this person.
So I do think that aspect of transparency is really useful for readers, particularly as we look at the decline in trust in news and overall. But one of the things I'm constantly hearing is that there's this tension between whether or not a journalist should remain neutral on social platforms, that idea of journalistic neutrality, or whether or not they should have a voice, have an opinion. What do you think?
So that's a complicated one. One of the things the BBC is very clear on, and being a public broadcaster more than maybe any other commercial outlets, especially here in the United States, is that as BBC journalists, we're not allowed to have opinions on social media, because anything that might cause the audience to question the BBC's impartiality is a no-no. And it's our whole social media policy, but the guidance is usually summarized into one phrase: don't be stupid, which is simple enough. And in the political circle, especially
use that on social media, really, is that single phrase.
It's useful advice. Yeah.
Good advice.
It's useful advice, not just for political reporters or journalists as a whole, but anybody else who's tweeting. Just don't be stupid. And what I find, especially within American and European Twitter circles and social media circles, we are also opinionated, even as reporters, and you want to weigh in on every twist and turn. And it's very navel-gazy in a way, and I think it does a disservice to audiences.
Twitter, Facebook, these can be incredibly dark places. I mean, they can be politically fraught, they can be cesspools of misinformation, disinformation. How do you personally cope with those? I mean, your presence is strong. How do you deal with it?
I'm always careful not to do anything just for the sake of it or because all my colleagues are doing it. So it truly must be the right thing to do. I'm very judicious about, why am I tweeting this? To what end?